Good evening. Would like to call our meeting to order, and Mr. Mansour, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to our Township Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, June 12th. And I'd like to ask for an approval of the agenda for this evening.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Support.
Any discussion, any changes? That, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will open the floor at this time for public comment, and we'll start here on the left side of my room, here in the front, and we'll work ourselves towards the back. Mr. Ert, good evening.
Good evening. Ed Ert, 7212 Porter Road. I'd like to welcome our new trustee here. I'm glad to see we've got that seat filled and we'll move forward now. I'd like to just bring up one thing on your agenda for Thursday. You have item B under, it's 9 under B, the Historic Commission Perry House Strategic Plan. What is the price tag on that strategic plan? What's it going to cost? Simple question. Then there's a, in that strategic plan, there's a thing here that says, I'll just read the last few words on here. Benefit to the Grand Blanc community and the opportunity to host township-sponsored and educational events. Okay, and then after that it says, this strategic plan is intended to serve as a guide for future use, operation, and maintenance of the Perry Homestead and Nature Trail. What does that sentence mean? A future guide to do what? So, I just caution you with that. Might lead you down a road you don't want to be. Thank you.
I always appreciate your questions, and we'll attempt to hopefully answer all of those during that segment of the board meeting. So thank you, and if we don't answer them, please see me afterward. Okay, and we're here again Thursday night. Working ourselves further back towards the back row there, and Mr. Jennings. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Marvin Jennings Jr., 5908 Maplebrook Lane, Flint, 48507. Just wanted to take the opportunity to come before the board and introduce myself. I am a practicing attorney here in the area. Our family's lived in Grand Blanc since 1986, so a long time residents here. As you know, there are 2 open circuit court seats here in Genesee County, and I have placed my name to be considered for one of those 2 seats. So I wanted to introduce myself and thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad to be considered to help serve this community, and I'm asking for your support and your consideration for a vote. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, and good luck. Anybody else have any public comment? Wish to speak? Ms. Hoffman? Good evening.
Mickey Hoffman, 4192 Noelwood Drive, Grand Blanc. I came because I see that number 9 on your considering future positioning had something to do with the historic Perry homes, and I wish to report that everything has cleared the State Department for the historical marker. The final board report will be Friday for the final evaluation. So I wanted to report that we were that far along for it to be official.
Congratulations.
Thank
So,
Great job and congratulations. Mr. Thomas?
Supervisor Hoffman, so it is done or it will be done on Friday?
No, the final approval will be Friday from the state board.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Okay, any other public comment? Okay, we'll close public comment and move to the review of our township board agenda for our meeting on Thursday, June 14th. And so if everyone wants to pull out their agenda for Thursday. Sure to go through the updated agenda. We did have an update to the agenda. Everybody has a new one at their place. So we will have a privileged presentation on Thursday to Boy Scout Troop 368 for their 50 years of service in the township. We will have the approval of the minutes. So if anybody has any changes they'd like to make, please forward them to Kathy before Thursday. Our consent agenda will have a number of items. Approval of the treasurer's report for the accounts payable for the general fund of $331,000, DPW fund, solid waste. Item B, the board will consider, yes, Mr. Mansour.
So, Supervisor Bennett, I had a couple of questions about
Sure.
some of the items in the in the treasurer's report.
Okay,
So on page 20 and on page 23, there are two separate invoices to Berger, I think Chevrolet. One is $36,992, the other is $20,606. I think one of those was for a police vehicle.
The other one's for the assessing department, that Equinox that we ordered.
Okay, all right. And also, maybe I've asked this before, but there's an entry on page 24, Glenn Allen Thomas, $8,400 about. Who's that for?
That's one of our technicians, I mean.
Building inspectors.
Building inspectors.
Okay.
okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Massey?
A question in regard to the building inspection by inspectors. What are their responsibilities, their roles?
What are their what?
Roles, responsibility as a
For
building.
roads?
What are their responsibility as a building inspector? Are these new buildings, older buildings, buildings that someone brings to your attention?
Anytime somebody pulls a building permit, requires inspections to go back to be signed off on for the permit. That's when we have Ted Shapansky is our building official, who's in the audience this evening, and then these guys are all under his direction. So you have mechanical inspectors, you have building inspectors, you have plumbing, electrical. He assigns them to go out and follow up on all the permits. So these guys are the ones who do the work. They look at plan reviews, and then they also do on-site inspections for any permits that are pulled.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Bennett?
Yes.
Can I have a couple more, please?
Oh, sure.
Sure. So, in the budget, or the latest, kind of revenue versus expenses, the kind of forecast, is there anything in there, I guess to Superintendent Lumina, that is out of, is out of expectations in terms of when we're getting revenues or, early, late, and expenses early, late? Is there anything particularly out of line there, or are we basically on track?
Yeah, we're on track. If you look at it by cost center and you go through it, there's nothing that's really out of the ordinary here. You're going to see some line items that maybe have exceeded or way under, but as far as revenues, we're right where we expected to be. In fact, we just found out at the end of last week, I got an email from MTA on where our revenue sharing is projected to be, and it's to be stable as it was from last year. Actually, the next 2 years looks relatively stable according to what they're projecting, so that's a good piece of business for us. Nothing that's completely out. Like I said, there's some line items that may be a little bit out if you go through it line by line, but the actual cost centers are within range.
So, are we going to require an amendment to the budget for the Department of Public Works property purchase?
Yeah, so that really, Yes, because it comes out of their reserve funds. So that isn't really through the budget. Like, we didn't run it through the budget. It's capitalized, so we're actually purchasing an asset. But you will see that come through because it's coming out of the reserve funds for the purchase of an asset.
That's this month, right?
Right.
And last question I have here, it's on pages 21 and then 32, revenue expense and expenses having to do with the community development block grant. It looks like we've received revenue of about 5,000 of the 120,000 that's in the budget for that. And on the expense side, it looks like we've spent about 53,000 of that. How does that work?
It's a great question. CDBG funds always are paid in arrears. We get reimbursed, so we have to complete the project, have everything 100% complete, the paperwork 100% complete, and then we submit it for reimbursement. So you're always going to see the revenue lags behind. It's always a reimbursement for our expense.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on from the treasurer's report to the board will consider a motion to approve the updated cell phone township use policy as recommended by the superintendent. Mr. Lehman, any comment?
So it's not really a change to our cell phone policy other than we didn't have it formalized, especially the portion that we rolled out earlier about quarterly reimbursements. And because a question had come up from one of the labor union groups about the overall policy, I wanted to have the board just approve it. So while there's really no changes, it's more of a review and a formalization of the policy, especially with the ACH direct deposit request that the township is doing quarterly instead of issuing checks monthly like we used to do.
Okay, thank you. Item C, the board will consider a motion to appoint Jim Bush as the alternate to the Zoning Board of Appeals to fill the vacant term ending December 2020. Mr. Bush is in the audience. I don't know, Mr. Bush, you want to just tell us a couple things about yourself maybe? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but appreciate you being here.
Hi, my name is Jim Bush. I'm at 5243 Lethbridge Road. Back a while ago, I started attending board meetings.
You put the microphone up. There you go.
In the past, I started attending board meetings, getting involved, and I thought a great way would be to volunteer where I could be helpful. So I filled out the paperwork and I submitted it for any seat that's open. If I can be helpful, I'd like to volunteer and do that. My background is varied. I started in IT. Now I'm more of a project manager. Right now I'm a troubleshooter. So projects that are having issues, my boss calls me in and tells me to go fix it. So it's interesting. I just got handed one today. We're opening an office in Utah. Well, it was supposed to be open July 1st, but things aren't done. So now I'm working to get that fixed. So that's what I do, a little bit of everything.
Okay. Well, the ZBA, you'll have a few projects there that will require attention, so we appreciate your volunteering.
I'm a process person. I like to follow process procedures. If the procedure doesn't work, you fix the procedure and you follow the process. So
Very good.
hopefully I can be helpful.
I'm sure you will.
Any questions or?
Thank you very much for volunteering.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Item D, the board will consider a motion to approve the Genesee County Road Commission cost estimate to complete the CDBG ditching on Jefferson Avenue for $35,387.70 and authorize township supervisor to execute all related CDBG and GCRC contracts and documents. You don't want that to say superintendent? I'm just kidding.
Whenever we do CDBG funds, I prefer that it says township supervisor
I
for.
know it. Okay, I signed some of those today. The item E, the board will.
Scott.
I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm sorry,
Sure,
Superintendent.
Mr. Thomas.
or Supervisor Bennett. I can't believe that I'm saying this, but last week, the state legislature got rid of prevailing wage, and that was effective immediately, if I'm, what I've read. Would it behoove us to send that back out for bids?
The ditching project is completed by the Genesee County Road Commission, so there has absolutely no impact. Where you'd see impact for us with the prevailing wage provisions that were repealed have more to do like with the water line replacement that we use CDBG funds for. One of the requirements that we had to do on those, bidding those projects out was that it had to pay prevailing wage. The first time we put out for bids, we got 0 responses. The second time we got 1 response, and we had to award it to them. One of the reasons we believe that we didn't get more responses was that provision of prevailing wage. It hurt for the number of people who would be interested in doing those, plus it was a smaller project. So that would have had an impact. We think that we probably would have seen at least more than 1 bidder on that project, but for these, it's totally road commission project and has no impact.
Thank you for asking the question, Mr. Thomas. Item E, the board will consider a motion for the approval of the 2018-2019 City Works annual subscription renewal for $24,535. That'll be paid to Azteca Systems. Authorize superintendent to execute all related contracts. Any information on that, Mr. Limita, that you want to share?
Director Sears here to answer any of your questions, but really it's just our licensing renewal fee. We have 18 licenses at $1,363 per license. And it's just again an annual renewal fee.
Yeah, and the next item that will be on the agenda for Thursday that I've been looking forward to, and I'm sure all of you have too, is the public hearing. And that's the board will hold a public hearing to gather input on the creation of a Downtown Development Authority, DDA, for the purposes of creating financial incentives for economic development within the identified DDA district. Mr. Limina, you want to comment?
Sure. The board's not really being asked to take an action at this time other than to hold the public hearing. This is your opportunity to open it up. All of the affected property owners within the proposed district received the letter and the map. We have fielded numerous questions from some of those residents in the area and a couple of the business owners. It is been very well received, I believe, so far. But it'll be interesting to see all of the county taxing agencies have the opportunity to be here as well. I did speak with Peggy Nolde this morning at another meeting from the County Equalization Department. She wrote it down, so I anticipate that Peggy will be here. She does appear to be supportive of our DDA and concept. This is just a great economic development tool for the township to be able to put into place to help spur development just a little bit quicker than it'll happen. I mean, if you look at where we've been since 2007 when the Tech Village area and that 4,000 acres was first proposed and where we are today, while we've certainly seen some development out there, it's nowhere near the acceleration that we could see. And then based upon the market assessment study that the board authorized and that public-private partnership, and you look at what the Chesapeake Group came back and said that there's potential that with 100% guarantee, they believe the potential exists for that development in an 8 to 10 year build out. Man, this is just maybe that last tool that we need is being able to form that TIF that can tip that scales and make that development happen sooner rather than later.
Well, I think our community is ready for something like this. One of the things that I think, at least on social media, whenever there's a mention of any sort of development occurring, all of you can probably recite the list of businesses. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. The list of businesses that everybody would like to see move to our community. This is an effort to open the doors a little bit wider for some of those developers to come to our area and to eliminate some hurdles and maybe even create a few incentives, some great incentives, for them to take another look at Grand Blanc Township. So I think it's one of the things that we're a huge thing that we're undertaking, and Mr. Limita and Mr. Laddie have worked on that definitely will. I don't know of any other way we can spur development any quicker than what this plan could do. So I think it's a great plan. I'm looking forward to getting it off the ground. Mr. Thomas?
I just want to throw my 2 cents into this for my
Mr. Thomas,
fellow...
can you pull your microphone down? Because I know on the video they can't hear you. They can see your lips moving, but they can't hear you.
No, that was a plan. I've already had to go to the corner and get away from Earl.
Now we want to hear you now.
I just, for everybody, especially to my fellow board mates, please reach out to Superintendent Limita, Attorney Laddie, and to Supervisor Bennett. This is probably, going to be the most exciting thing that we do in our term. I mean, it is so much to learn and so much to digest. So reach out to these three because they've done their homework and answer questions, and they have questions too on where we want to go. And please, please, please reach out to them. And I just want to commend Supervisor Bennett, Attorney Laddie, and Superintendent Limita for the outstanding job and the leadership that you three have taken and and giving us the opportunity to create this DDA. It's very impressive to you three. And I appreciate you taking your time to answer my questions and quandaries. So take advantage of these three as a resource.
And we will have a presentation. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. We will have a presentation on Thursday that invite, I took the occasion, I had a meeting this afternoon and received an email from a resident who said, hey, I voted for you and other board members so that we could see some development in Grand Blanc Township. And my quick response was to him, that, in short, was, hey, come to the meeting on Thursday because we're going to be laying the groundwork for something that could be huge. And I think the other thing that we're going to talk a little bit about, I think, in Mr. Lehman's presentation is what is the current status of Grand Blanc Township when you stack us up against other communities in the area? And I think, looking at our taxable value is one way of seeing how much development Grand Blanc Township truly has been able to garner over the years. I mean, when you figure that Grand Blanc Township has $1.5 billion approximately in taxable value, and the next closest municipality in Genesee County is Flint Township at approximately $800 million, Mr. Limina, about half of where we're at. It shows that people are loving Grand Blanc Township when it comes to development, right? And maybe we're lacking a couple of people's favorite restaurants or retailers, but those entities are having a tough time sorting out what direction they're going in right now, let alone building new locations. So I think with other businesses, we've been very successful in attracting them to our community as well as housing. So I think we're on the bubble for some huge things. So I think we're right there, and this Downtown Development Authority is just going to help us to get over that peak. Anything else anybody has on the DDA, or we're good till Thursday? And invite your friends to the meeting. And our future positioning, the board will review the Charter Township of Grand Blanc investment policy, which was adopted by resolution in 2006 and amended in 2010. Everybody has a copy of it. I know that it was emailed to you a couple weeks ago. And this is, just a working session. We're going to have our auditors here on Thursday to go over the CAFR, and I'm sure they can weigh in on any questions anybody would have that they'd want to have an accountant answer. But I guess, I think everybody should have a copy of that policy, and I know Earl's been doing some work on it too, and I think you had a couple of suggested changes, Mr. Guzak.
Yes. I'd just like to briefly just go through.
Sure.
The first one, of course, the policy, everybody's read that, so in section 1, there's probably no questions.
Everybody found their copy?
And section 2 is the scope of it. Is there any questions on section 2? It's just the scope of, the type of funds that we can invest here, like the general funds or our special revenue funds, that type of thing.
So, yes, Mr. Massey.
I have a question.
On which one? Number one?
Policy 1. You think as written is acceptable for the future?
Yes.
Is there something you see that's missing, Mr. Massey, or?
I don't see anything that's missing, but just since he said it's acceptable,
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that we all agreed to
Right.
what's in there.
And that, this is a living and breathing document that isn't written in stone, that we can, as opportunities come along, we can adjust it too. But on number 2, if nobody else had any questions on number 1 policy, commercial paper, does that fit into?
That's not in scope. That's not on 2. That's farther
Okay.
down.
Oh, is that, okay, all right.
These are just the funds that we have here, like general funds.
Okay, I see, these are just,
These are our funds
gotcha.
that we
Okay.
can invest, okay? And of course, you can't invest in cemetery funds or pension funds or healthcare funds or employee deferred compensation. That's why they're not listed
Okay.
here, okay? So
All right.
that's just a list of those.
So this is just down below is the list of our funds that,
Well, the next one, section 3, is prudence, just to show that we have to be a prudent person. We have to, investments can't be for speculation. It has to be a prudent thing, and someone should be investing as if it was their own funds and not someone else's funds, is what basically what the prudence. Is there any questions on that? And the objectives, of course, it's,
Do
Mr.
you mi-
Mass?
Yes,
Or-
Mr. Chair.
yes,
Do you mind,
backing up to that one, number 3.
Well, Mr. Treasurer, yes, expounding on what you mean by as though they were your own investment?
well, if you're reading this section, it says, "A prudent person's rule which states investments shall be made with judgment and care under circumstances then prevailing with persons or prudence, discretion, intelligent exercise and management of their own affairs, not for speculation, but for investment. Consider the probability safety of their capital as well as the probable income." So it's,
So if you were investing the money for your own sake,
right, yeah, they want you to be prudent, they don't want you to be speculative, it's gotta be, and you gotta remember, this is an operating account, this is not a retirement account. So the rules that applies to this, the PA 20, are set up different than the rules that apply to our pension accounts. Our pension accounts have more diversity because they feel, this is operating, so we're more short-term, where your pension accounts are over a longer period of time, so if they're onto some things that go down, they've got time for it to come back up. But if I'm into some type of thing that it's at down market and I have to use it, well, then I'm gonna take a hit because now I'm in a down market. So the rules that are set up by the state are different, specifically for working capital as compared to if we look at the policy for our pension plans.
and so that's Michigan Public Act 20 that governs the investment of operating.
Of operating
Capital.
funds, right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
why is Michigan Public Act 20 is not stated here?
Well, it's later in the manual.
the document.
Oh, it is?
Yes,
Oh,
it's later,
okay.
it's farther down.
Okay.
I have
Yeah, Mr.
one question. I'm a little behind here, so
Sure.
I just want to go back up to 1.0, the policy. One thing that jumps out at me, and I know we're not going to hash this out right now, highest investment return. So my question for that would be, how do we know what the highest investment of return is? How do you determine that?
Well, first of all, it says the highest rate of return, which is correct, but it says with the maximum security. So there's a big, there's a big hammer there. I mean, you can't just get the maximum investment. You gotta have the protection of the security of it based on the time frame that you're in, and the circumstance. Because, when I took office in 2008, we had, CDs were like at 5%, and all of a sudden, when I got them, they're down to 1, and all of a sudden, they went to 0.05. I mean, the whole bottom dropped out of everything, so I've been through quite a lot, so I'm very cautious, because those things, if you invest in certain things at that point in time, you'd lose it all.
Well, that leads to one other question then.
Okay.
To your point, then, maximum security, what's your definition of maximum security in terms of the way you invest?
Okay, well, my definition of that is I look at other options that we're at. I look at how far I have to invest it, what's needed, because farther down it's going to talk about timelines and what these funds are just not out there for a long period of time. They have to cover accounts payable, they have to cover big investments, they have to cover pipelines, they have to cover everything. So I'm trying to maximize it within the time frame that I've got. And before I used to go out longer on CDs, but since I've been burnt, I won't go 12 months or over 12 months. Usually I'm below that. And right now, because of the market, there's been so many federal changes. We've had the Fed rate bump 3 or 4 times so far, and it's going to bump again. So I don't want to go much more than 35 days or something, because the rate's going to jump, and the CDs have jumped in the last 6 months. everything's been jumping, so I'm sure shooting short term. So the maximum investment return, you have to look at, okay, where are we at, what's coming up? And right now, I maybe could get a higher return, but if I lock it in, I know 2 weeks later it's gonna be higher, so I have to say, well, I'm not gonna get the highest at this point, but I will get it later, because I'm betting that, because I know the feds are gonna bump it up, and by tradition, the rates go up. So it's still invested, but not at the rate, to take it out to longer term.
Mr. Atkins, you've got some experience with, I don't know, you served on the committee or chaired the committee for investment for the city or City of Graham, right?
Yeah, and, a couple one real recommendation is, you could go through this at pretty lengthy discussion. I would recommend maybe a finance committee or some sort of committee that focuses more on this investment policy. I know you have a lot of knowledge, Earl, Trustee Guzak, that you could bring to that and maybe bring some people up to speed. I personally, I think that it's worth exploring in maybe a smaller group and look at some comparisons to other municipalities and make sure we're getting, we're in a very, very strong economy. I understand the maximum security, and we want to be prudent with taxpayer dollars. But I do think there's opportunity to make much more return on our investment dollars. And I'd just like to explore that maybe in a smaller group or committee, or be my recommendation.
That's good, and I know that there's 7 people up here. You're all going to have a different attitude of how you want to invest. You might be more, prudent. You might be more prudent than me. He might have more investment, more risk, tolerance. Everybody's got a different flavor for that, and every township has a different person running that. But ultimately, because I've seen people that have followed this policy and other policies, and this policy is basically mirrored after the Government Act policy. And then Mr. Seifert, the one that did it, was the president of the Treasurers Association at the time when he developed it, and he mirrored it out that. So I'd be happy to look at that, but I know everybody has different ideas. But ultimately, if I don't feel comfortable in that risk, I'm not going to go there, because I'm the one that's accountable for it, okay? Because I've had other treasurers tell me that they followed the policy and got into certain things, and you'll see one in here that I'll show. It's got repo agreements in there. And back in 2009, before I was, well, actually it was 2000, before I was here, it was 2006, I think. Anyway, there was somebody got burnt on repos, and so it was put into this policy that we're not going into repos, because it's very complicated, and if you don't have all your ducks in a row, because there's different levels in there.
Mr. Guzak, you brought up a good point. I just want to ask Attorney Laddie, and Mr. Guzak mentioned that, as Mr. Adkins had, brought up the possibility maybe to have a smaller committee looking at this, but I guess I'm wondering, where is the line that, the treasurer, I think everybody on our board understands they've got a fiduciary responsibility. I think everybody has to protect the township assets.
Correct.
And
Correct.
it's not just the treasurer's job. In fact, I think the treasurer probably is there to carry out the board's wishes when it comes to financial policy. Is that accurate, or is the treasurer a separate entity and they decide those things?
Well, that's interesting. I think that your broad statement is correct. I think that ultimately the financial responsibility belongs to the board. But I'll say this, nobody's going to be more deeply involved in the day-to-day financing and investment strategy than the treasurer and the treasurer's office.
Right.
The other thing is the public perception is something Mr. Guzak pointed out, and that will be that he is the spearhead of our investment policy, and he will take the brunt of the problems,
right,
if that occurs. But I think, and again, Mr. Lehman just pointed out that in the delegation of authority in Section 5, the treasurer is designated as the investment officer of the township and is responsible for the decisions and activities. So I think what probably should happen is, if you do break into a smaller group for discussion or possible changes,
that you're gonna have to give, I mean, throughout that discussion, the treasurer's gonna have, he's gonna be the point person on this policy, he should be the point person on changes, and he should bring it back to you with discussion. In other words, we're gonna have to give him a little more deference than we do
Right.
somebody else.
Yeah, another point I'd like to bring out, the control that the board has is this investment policy, okay? Every treasurer, not just me, but any treasurer, it's not talking about me, it's talking about where the treasurer is. He has to follow this policy. If he's within this policy, then he is doing what you're wishing, okay? Because everybody's gonna have a different idea. Well, I'd rather go here, I'd rather go there. If they're within the policy, they're okay, all right? And even though this is a safe policy, there's no guarantee that if you invest in anything that's in here, that you will always win. You will not win, okay? Because there have been treasurers that have followed their policies and have lost funds, okay? But they followed it. They were within the rules, but they followed it, and that's their choice. They can take as much risk as they want, but the board is giving the authority of these parameters, and then I need to follow those parameters, okay? Which I do.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Massey?
I think, Trustee Atkinson, I agree with what he said, that I think we need a small committee to work with the treasurer. Because I can foresee a problem, not with the treasurer that we currently have, but if we get a new treasurer, we're telling the new treasurer, okay, basically, you can do whatever you want to. That's what this policy really says.
Well, within the guidelines of this policy, right?
Well,
Within the guidelines of this policy.
I think what Mr. Massey's saying is that within this policy, but maybe this policy
all
needs to
I'm
tighten
saying.
up.
yes,
So-
yes, absolutely. It needs to be tighter. It's
yeah.
very loosely, it can create a problem.
Well, and I think it behooves the board members I mean, we are fiduciaries for the township, so I think it behooves us to know this intimately well. Again, I think, for us to try and go through this line by line at a board meeting is gonna, take us quite a while, and I'm not sure all of us want to do that right now, but I think a smaller group just like we do with other items on our agenda, we have a small group look at it and then bring back the suggestions to the board.
Well,
So I think, and Mr. Guzak obviously would, head up that task force. But would you be opposed to having a smaller group look at this?
I think you did send some questions to Mr. Limita, and he was gonna answer those too. It's up to you.
Yeah. Boy, do you have any problem with us? I mean, I don't want, and we can go through your suggestions, but I think it might behoove us to have a small group that, if it's a consensus of the board to do that, and,
Well,
they can go over the people that are interested in participating in that.
Well, I'd like to know, I mean, we've got all the questions, you've had 2 weeks to look at it, and Mr. Limita has all the questions for that last 2 weeks,
I don't know that it's
right?
everybody's questions, it's just some emails that,
I really, and I did get, Scott forwarded me some of the questions from different board members, but realistically, it sounds to me like if you guys want to do a comprehensive review of the policy, and I would give you this, if you go to the GFOA website or the Michigan GFOA website, download their model policy, you'll see that it pretty closely mirrors what we have in our hands here. I think the policy is very solid. When you go through the delegation of authority, I mean, the suggestion that Trustee Atkins made about having a committee to just have, it gives some eyes and ears and a conversation level with the treasurer to bounce his ideas off about investment decisions. I don't think that's is necessarily a horrible idea, obviously, because it's just more folks looking at the data and making decisions. This is about this is our liquid, money. This is the money that we need for operations. We spend about $2 million a month, and it's a lot of short-term investments. It's less than 12 months. And this policy is strong in that it follows what the Michigan Public Act 20 allows as far as the investment vehicles, and that's under number 8, authorized and suitable investments. Certainly that's a board philosophical decision. You guys can expand or shorten that list based upon what the Public Act allows.
Right.
So you do control the vehicles for investment. And then, but I think it's a good idea if you want to go through and just have that smaller group go through. I might make the recommendation that you include finance director stacking with a couple of the trustees and the treasurer.
Yeah.
To be able to weigh in on it.
And I've had, board members ask me and others ask about, it isn't just about protecting the money, it's about what opportunities there are for investing it, and asking Mr. Guzak, and I know a few board members have talked to other municipalities and have some ideas of how they're investing and what their rate of return is, what have you, and all that can be just explored in a task force and look at those opportunities and options. Mr. Mansour, did...
No, I was just going to make that suggestion that from a consensus standpoint, I certainly would support a small group just kind of getting together and kind of working with the treasurer on this and making sure the policy is updated and reflects, kind of make a recommendation back to the board for any changes.
Okay. Ms. Lane?
If that's the consensus this evening, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that maybe you and the treasurer get together and select whichever board members you want to include.
Yeah.
But I would also remind everybody that 3 board members is a committee, 4 has to be posted, so any meetings that are going to have 4 members of the board present, I need to give an 18-hour notice and
Right.
post it, okay? But I would think.
Yeah,
go ahead.
whoever's interested, let me know, and let Mr. Guzak know, and
You can,
we'll put together a task force, a committee, or whatever you want to call it.
do you want to make that part of this matter on the agenda on Thursday so that it's not delayed?
I don't know that we have to make it formal, but we'll just do it informally, and anybody who wants to serve on it, see Mr. Guzak or myself, and I'm sure Mr. Guzak would be glad to coordinate that. And if we end up with more than 3 board members, then we'll notify Ms. Lane and we'll have it publicized. Mr. Limita?
Just a suggestion, Supervisor Bennett, we'll leave it on the agenda for Thursday. That gives a
Sure.
couple of days for the board to consider. If there are 3 of you that are like-minded, with the treasurer being one and 2 others that want to get together, and like I said, if you want to include the finance director, I think it would.
I think that'd be advisable.
She would be an asset to the group. If you do that by Thursday, maybe on Thursday, you could make that
Sure.
motion to form the investment committee and then move
Okay.
forward. And I think David's point is well taken. You guys look at the delegation of authority, watch how that follows with the Michigan GFOA model policy. You're going to designate the investment officer, and ours it's the township treasurer. There are some Michigan statutes that invest that in him, and but I think everybody could use a little help now and again. And I think just getting through the policy may be a good exercise.
Well, and it's a huge responsibility for our treasurer, and I know he's done a great job with it, but I'm sure...
And for the board's purposes, I looked back to find when I could find the resolution. It was 2006. September 14th, 2006 was the dated copy of the initial resolution for this investment policy. And then there were meeting minutes noted with a change to it in January 14th of 2010. So that was the last, it was initiated 2006 and revised in 2010.
Right, and I'd like to point out what that revision was. If you go to page 3.
What number is it?
Page 3. Now you're in authorization of financial dealers and institutions. In there, the end of the second paragraph, and of course this was in 2010, and you'll see in here the last line, it says, in order for the financial institutions to be on the appropriate investment list, they must be in the upper 20 percentile as rated by the rating service. And we do have a rating service. That was at 20%.
Instead of 35.
Instead of 35. And at that point in time, I had about 6 banks. And in order to be 20%, you have to be an A or B rating. Well, at that point in time, I had to go to 35% and bring in C banks, because I had banks that were A's and B's, and all of a sudden, I had banks that were D's and E's. And then I had to start shoveling them, shifting them around, and when I could. CDs you can't, okay? But that's when I raised it up to 35%, so that I would still have a diversity of at least 4 to 5 banks. Otherwise, I would have had maybe 1 or 2 banks. So that was what that change was at that point in time, because it was a very critical time, and then we'd be sitting with 2 banks instead of 5, and that has stayed a long time. Now, if you look at the last reading, now we're both, most of the banks are in the B's now. but it took a long, long time for that to come up. So that's what that particular one was.
So, Mr. Guzak, any other concerns you want to bring up tonight about it? Otherwise, we'll let the committee hammer out, with you, any suggested changes and come back to the board. Is what it
Yeah,
sounded
I
like.
do have one change. I don't know if we want to wait. Should I just wait until, just wait? Okay.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda will be.
Scott, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry. Mr. Thomas?
Is this going to be an official committee, or is this going to be a task force? Or, I mean, are we going to vote to form a
We'll
finance?
form a committee and see where it goes.
Or just a task
I
force?
mean, we'll call it a committee, how's that? And we'll talk about it on Thursday, if you're interested. Let Mr. Guzak and myself know, and
Yes, sir.
we'll see where it goes Thursday. If there's 3 people, great. If there's 4, we'll just have to let people, our public, know when we're meeting. With that, the next item that is on the agenda, thank you, Mr. Guzak, for going through that. I know Mr. Guzak did some work on that policy and has a bunch of notes and highlights of a few suggested changes, but we'll let him bring that to the task force or the committee. The next item on Thursday's agenda under future positioning, the board will consider a motion to adopt the historic Perry Homestead and Nature Trail strategic plan as submitted and direct implementation thereof. Okay, Mr. Limita?
In your packet, you had the strategic plan that was put together by our planning director, Mark Lloyd, working with the Historic District Committee. It's one of the things that we've been asking for several years and trying to answer that question, what exactly is the Perry Homestead and Nature Trails, and what is our intention for it? Mr. Lloyd was able to spend some time with that Historic District Committee and really work with them to get some of those questions answered, and that document that you have in your packet is really where that came from, as they try to define those questions for the board. What is it? What are we going to do with it? And do we support it? I know he presented it to the Perry Homestead Committee, and I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to review, if you're prepared to make a recommendation to the board to either approve the strategic plan or move away from it, but that kind of brings you up to date.
Supervisor Bennett?
Mr. Thomas, would you like to comment?
As a member of the Perry Homestead Committee, along with Treasurer Guzak and Supervisor Bennett, we've spent countless hours on this, and we had a special meeting 2 weeks ago, and our committee is all in favor of this plan, and we're very excited for the new future and the new benefits that the Perry Homestead Educational Center is going to supply to our township.
I think if I could add to that, Mr. Thomas, that we had a few questions from one of our residents this evening, and the question was, what is this going to cost us? And I think, one of the things that we've been asking for as a board with regard to Perry House is kind of the broader question of, what is this? What is the Perry House, and what is it there for? What purpose is it going to serve? I think, one of the things we talked about early on, I'm not so much sure with this board, but a previous board where we brought in somebody with regard to policy governance was, what good for which people at what cost? And I think right now we're at the stage of deciding what good for which people. And at what cost is what we need to determine yet. But I think what we're trying to focus in on is what good are we trying to achieve by having this Perry House? And I think that's what the strategic plan does. It doesn't lay out how much money are we going to spend doing it, but what good are we trying to achieve, and who is it for that we're trying to do this good for? And I think one of the things you'll see is that we don't want to be in the rental business. We don't have this $1 million investment that we want to put at risk by renting it out for a group that unintentionally might do damage to it, but use it more for township-wide events or township-sponsored events. Also for educational purposes. We talked about everything from helping the schools develop a curriculum, so if they want to bring a fifth grade class out to the Perry home, that there's a curriculum that they can follow, and activities that the educators would want to or be able to use in their coursework. So it's making things available that basically ready-made for our community to use. So I'm not sure we're at what cost yet is this going to be, but one thing that I feel good about is that we have nailed down what good and for who we're doing this. And I think as the Historic Commission fleshes that out a little bit more, I think we'll be happy with expenses associated with it, because it isn't going to be about, you know, putting in a commercial kitchen or doing things that aren't along those lines. So some of it it's a work in progress. I can't remember the other question that was posed, but at what cost, I know is a big one. Mr. what was your other question?
In your package you got from them, it says this strategic plan is intended to serve as a guide for future use and operations and maintenance of the Perry Center. What is the future guide? Does that lead you to other things you don't want to be?
Right. I think right now the strategic plan, and we should make this available somewhere to the public. I don't know if it's in our, it's in our packet.
Board packet.
But I think as we develop our new, I don't want to take the air out of our work that we're doing, but there's going to be some things done with our website that possibly Perry House could have a place on there with what its purpose is and what have you. But
And all that stuff right there.
yeah, so I think some of the proposed community activities are things like local history education classes and reenactments, Easter egg hunts, workshops, art shows and fairs, concerts in the park, botany education classes, photographic opportunities for proms, presentations, state of the city, Christmas tree lighting ceremony, amphitheater for local bands and education, drama presentations, afternoon teas, create an educational kiosk or signage display, plant identification and rain garden, things of that nature. So as far as future plans, I think we kind of set the direction, and if it fits into the category, then I guess we're okay with it. But if it calls for doing something that doesn't fit into that, it's all subject. I mean, if the Historic Commission, as independent as they are, they operate with us overseeing things ultimately.
This is, and we're not looking at it as it to ever be a profit center. This is something that we're putting out for our community, and it's one of our treasures. It's one of our hidden treasures that from now, well, as long as the board approves it, we're going to be highlighting it in everything, every aspect from here on out. This is where the supervisors will be holding their ceremonies, their state of the township addresses. This is going to be our bridge, not to nowhere, Mr. Ert, but it's going to be a bridge from the past to the future. And it's going to be very, very, very exciting. We have a dynamic set of residents that are going to take it, and you'll enjoy it.
Okay, unless there's anything else on that, we'll move on to our next item. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Guzak,
Supervisor.
for your work on that. Operational issues, the board will hear a presentation of the comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year 2017 from Plant Moran, and consider a motion to accept the report as presented. So basically our audit will be presented and we'll go through it. So all of you received a copy of that already, I believe, last month. And so take a look at it. I'm sorry?
With the packet.
Right. So you should have gotten a packet already on that, and take a look at it, bring it to your meeting, to the meeting Thursday. And let's ask our questions.
Supervisor Bennett?
Yes,
I
Mr.
will
Lehman.
have hard copies for everybody on Thursday evening, so you'll get you don't have to worry about printing it out or bringing it with you. You'll have a hard copy,
Okay.
so that it will just be easier when the plant run representatives are here, and
Okay.
they'll walk you point by point through the annual
Okay.
audit.
So I'm the only one who has the hard copy already.
You are.
Okay. All right, so we'll provide you a copy, but you can look at your copy in the packet up until then. Under operational issues, item B, the board will consider a motion to authorize superintendent to execute an actuarial valuation report agreement with Rodwin Consulting Company for the purpose of determining the actuarial valuation of the township's other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, as well as the newly required GASB 74 report for $12,900. So, Mr. Lehman, would you like to explain that?
Sure, I'm asking the board to approve us to just move forward with Rodwin Consulting Company rather than go out for RFPs for this actuarial services. And there's a reason behind it being is we've been very satisfied, number one, with Rodwin Consulting. They've done the last several actuarial valuations for us for our OPEB. And this year, if you recall, we were always on a 3-year cycle. We had to do it every 3 years. Well, that's going to change after this year. We'll be on a 2-year cycle. In fact, because of the changes we made to our retiree health care benefits through employee participation, contract negotiations, and investment strategies. We were going to do one last year, and we did reach out and speak with Rodwin Consulting, and they cautioned us to wait a year because we were going to have to do it again anyway because of the new GASB 74 statement that had come out. We know that this one is going to be more involved. We also like the continuity of having somebody come in and do it who's done the last, because it's really going to show the impact that the board's actions have taken on addressing the OPEB unfunded liability. We have reached out. We do have a letter back that was in your packet. They are prepared and ready to go, and if the board approves it on Thursday, we'll give them the green light on Friday. I know it's busy, and I know with the addition of the GASB 74 statement coming out is going to delay it, but I think that you will probably see this report back to you sometime in, I would venture to guess, probably October of this year, and we would have it, the presentation, no later than November, so you'll see it before the end of the year.
So, Mr. Lehman, these folks that do the actuarial work, I would imagine, are probably going to get very, very busy very soon. Is that correct?
Because of the changes, there's going to be a scramble for it, without a doubt. So we'd like to obviously get ours. We'd like to see that before the end of the year. Would be very helpful. We'll probably get that information back to you even before we are finalizing the 2019 budget, which I think might be helpful for the board as you work through that. The also is just the fact that when you look at the prices that she gave us, the quote for the OPEB valuation is the exact same as what we paid 3 years ago off that 2014 valuation. So that held at $7,000. It's the $5,900 additional for the new GASB 74 reports that are required. And then moving forward, we'll have to do them every 2 years. It will not be as expensive as this. It's just that the initial setup is that $5,900 for the GASB 74 that we have to deal with.
So just for the public and maybe some of our board members, that this valuation, it basically will tell us to what percentage we are funded, right, Mr. Lehman? I mean, in terms of our other post-employment benefits. And we believe that because of some of the changes that you've initiated with some of our contracts with their employee groups and our investments, that actually our valuation should be in a positive direction.
Yeah, if you think back, when I first got here, they were just delivering the report, and I had them redo it because of some of the assumptions I didn't believe were correct. So they restated it, and if you recall at that time, the last valuation report we had, it was a $35 million liability for retiree health care. $31 million of that was unfunded. So we started to aggressively go after it, and we continue to do that to this day. It's about paying down, and you'll see that during the CAFR when we talk about the excess fund balance in the general fund and where we want to put it. We're going to continue to go after our unfunded liabilities. I also will be sending out the MERS valuation report for our defined benefit police pension plan that we just received. That shows some great news. We're up to 68% funded on that MERS plan because of aggressively going after it, and I think that's very positive. For the new transparency rules about having to provide the state with a corrective action plan, 60% was the threshold for your pension, 40% is the threshold for your OPEB. Now, we were at 14% funded. I don't know where we're going to come in with these changes. I'm excited to see where this comes out. I don't know that we'll hit the 40%. I think that we're going to be required to create a corrective action plan and submit it to the state. But I'm very happy with what the steps we've taken so far, from the change in investment strategies, change in the contract. We eliminated it moving forward for new employees, and we have retirees participating. Those were all huge changes that are going to have a sizable impact. We've also had some very great returns on our investments, which have helped offset it. It won't be at 31 million and 14%, but I don't have a good feel for where it's going to come in at. I don't think we'll hit the 40%, but it's going to show, and I had to report this last year for the first time, and it showed what the steps we've taken so far. And I think that the state will agree that I think we'll ask for a waiver. I don't know that we'll be granted it from the correction action plan based upon what we've done, but I think the board will be very pleased with being able to see the results. It's also important for us to be able to show it to our employees because we got incredible buy-in from them on the participation, and we want to show them that buy-in counted, that it really truly had an impact, that we're going to be able to live up to our promises in the future.
Right. Very good.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Massey?
I have a question for
Yes.
the superintendent. So will some of this information be shown in a graph form?
You'll see in the MERS valuation what you get. I can certainly send out copies of the last valuation so you can see what kind of data gets reported, and then we can take it and then we can put it together however the board wishes to see it once we receive it.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Supervisor.
Yeah, Mr. Atkins?
I have a question to Superintendent Limadat. This is a little new to me, and it looks like it is something new in general, but the GASB 74 report,
Elaborate on it.
Yeah, what they're requiring for us, it has more to do with the transparency. Obviously, one of the things that was hard from a public transparent view to be able to look at a municipality and be able to see exactly how strong you were financially, because there was no requirements, especially from a healthcare standpoint. All you had to do was pay as you go. There's no requirement in government that you, or in law, that you pre-fund your retiree healthcare. So you could show that you're very healthy by doing exactly that, and say, well, no, we're not having any problem meeting our annual required contribution. Our ARC is fine. We make that payment every year and we're good to go. Okay. So that would lead, if you looked at it and you looked at our CAFR, it's kind of skewed. Our asset position looks pretty strong, right? Because we're not reporting a big chunk of liability that's hanging back there. And so the new GASB, the Government Accounting and Standings Board, is trying to change that transparency, and they're putting more reporting requirements. So now those have to be included in our annual audits, and it also gets included in our performance dashboard that we're required to post. It has everything to do with now being much more transparent about saying, hey, we're in a strong position financially, but we do have some liability that we have to address. And so that's really what it boils down to, is being much more transparent about all those liabilities, because you painted a much more rosy picture financially if you can hide $31 million worth of unfunded liability that nobody necessarily, it's there, but they would have to go look for it. Now you put it out front, you report it, and you tell them what you're doing about it, and that's what those standards are changing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or concerns with regard to going with the Rodwin Consulting for the actuarial work. Okay, thank you, Mr. Limita. Item C, the board will consider a motion to reschedule the August 7th Committee of the Whole meeting to August 8th due to a conflict with the election. The November 6th meeting as well, the Committee of the Whole meeting, may also be considered for rescheduling if you'd like. So there's a schedule actually in the packet of the meetings, and take a look at it before Thursday, but I think it makes sense for the August meeting. Ms. Lane, the election is actually on August 7th, which is when we're scheduled for our meeting. So does anybody have an objection to moving it to the 8th?
The other option, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's all right.
The other option would be, depending on what the agenda is, that we not hold even a committee of the whole meeting with the election the night before and just discuss it. But if it's as lengthy as this one, I mean, we've had shorter agendas that wouldn't require the committee of the whole meeting.
Well, we can
So
think about it
that's
for
an option.
until Thursday, but decide whether or not we want to have that meeting or cancel it. And I have no problem with having it on the 8th, and if it looks like we don't have any business, we could always cancel it. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, because the last time we did this just previously, a few months back, and I thought it was good that everybody got to at least have a full meeting for the meeting and discuss things, so. And like she says, if there's not much on there, maybe you don't need it. It just depends on what
Right.
we're gonna have.
Right. But if our DDA is moving along, we may have some pretty full agendas here coming up.
Right.
We don't want to delay
We
that.
don't wanna push that back.
Right. So we'll, my personal thought is to actually move the meeting to the 8th, and if it looks like we don't have enough business, we could always cancel it, but at least it's on the schedule
And then move the
November?
6th to the 7th.
for November. Yes, that would be my,
Okay, I mean,
my thought.
If we're doing it, we might as well handle them both the
Right.
same.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll get a consensus on Thursday and make those changes. Item D, the board will consider a motion to approve a request for increased flat rate daily wages for election workers at the request of the clerk from $175 to $225 for election inspectors and from $200 to $250 for chairperson and co-chairperson. I know Mr. Limita, I believe, was it you, Mr. Limita, that sent out the memo explaining that, or?
I sent out one and then so
Okay.
did he. It's
Okay.
a follow-up.
All right. So I don't know which of you want to comment on it, but Mr.
It's really
Limita?
the clerk, and I just provided a recap because I thought there might be some questions from the board, especially from our newest member, about how do we get to where we are today from where we were. If you look at my recap, it started with election workers were previously paid $10 for any mandated training, no matter how long it took. In January, the election committee passed a motion to increase the mandatory training to $10 an hour. The board did support it. At the same meeting, they talked about increasing the pay for chairpersons, co-chairs from $175 to $200 for the day, and the election inspectors from $150 to $175. But the board tabled that for future discussion. It came back up in April, and the board moved to make those changes to the $200 a day or $175 a day for the chairpersons and election inspectors respectively, but it also included the provision for or $15 an hour or $12 an hour, whichever was greater. After the May election, it was shown that the hourly rate was greater for most of those election chairperson and inspectors, but it created quite a nightmare for payroll for the clerk's office to track and for payroll to come up with it. And after that, that suggestion went back to the clerk about finding an alternative to making that and or. So we spent more time from a payroll perspective and from the deputy clerk's perspective in tracking those hours to see which one was a full rate or the hourly rate, and then having to manually input that into the payroll system instead of just being able to run that the chairpersons are running at $200 a day and the inspectors are running at $175 a day. We probably spent more time and more money from a staff perspective in hours in figuring out which one made sense, so that's why it's back before you. Clerk Lane does have a memo in there, and I've let her explain that from, after that perspective. Ms.
Well,
Lane?
I know that all of the election inspectors were very grateful for the board recognizing the length of days and the time they spend. Now, the May election had a very simple one ballot question, and we had a consolidated all of the precincts. So it was a much smaller group, but it was a very small election. And so rather than keep track for almost 100 people and add additional time to our staff here in the office, the average for just that simple election was 223, with most being paid right around the 223, with the election chair people who have to come back here after an election, go through the review board, make sure that everything is accurate, because the counting board doesn't want us to be off one vote in any election. So we have to double check everything before it goes to them to ensure that we have every explanation properly documented. So that's why election inspectors have to work additional hours. And then it was, even with the simple election, it was still 11 o'clock before I left here and went downtown to deliver the packets that I have to take to them the night of the election. So I'm willing to be fair to our workers and all of their dedication, but I also want to minimize staff time. And I know that the election inspectors were all very grateful for what they did receive. And some called and said, I think they made a mistake. So I think the new proposal of 225 and 250 is acknowledging both that $12 and 15-hour, and that's based on that election in May. So I appreciate what you've done for us, and I would hope that you would accept this recommendation to be the more reasonable for everybody.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I
Massey?
have a question.
Sure.
Let me be explicit about what I'm gonna ask. I'm not questioning the $225. I'm not questioning the $250. But I have a question for the clerk. If someone works 45 hours, hypothetical, they still get paid $225.
Yes. But I have yet to see anybody work 45 hours for an election. I
just use
understand.
that as an example. But you put an emphasis on how many hours they work. So what we're moving away from is the hourly rate, but you could break it down to an hourly rate. So I'm saying that we would never deal with an hourly rate, regardless. If they come in at, I don't know what time they get started.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock, and they work to 12 o'clock, they still get $225.
That's correct.
Okay, that's all I want to make sure.
Yeah.
However, you know, Mr. Massey, one of the things I think we've done in the past, I don't want to muddy the water, but if there was a very unusual circumstance where it required coming back a second day or whoever, can't imagine what could happen. The board could always take an action. Is that correct, Mr. Laddie or Mr. Limita, that we could take an action to decide to give them an additional stipend? So we could do that in the event that there's a issue that causes for a significant amount of additional hours.
Well, shouldn't that be stated here?
It would just be a board action. We've done it in the past, but,
You have?
yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes, that did occur, and the clerk did come back to the board the next day and say, we had unusual circumstances, and we were here till 2 in the morning, and this is what I like to do. They proposed this, and of course, the board did approve it. So it has happened. It's been in the minutes.
Mr. Mansour?
Yeah, so just to kind of put everything in perspective, a couple of months ago, this board agreed to a 25% increase in their daily wage, or in their election day wage. Now, we're going to be talking about, depending on whether it's the worker or the manager, we're going to talk about a 40 or 50% increase in these wages. Okay, so I mean, I appreciate all the work that the election people do. I know they come in early, I know they're diligent and all that. But I mean, those are pretty big numbers. So if you take a look at it on an hourly rate basis, that means that we are, if you settle in at 250 or 225, that means you're building in a 17 or 18-hour day wage based on $12 or $15 an hour, depending on which type of person it is. So if it's taking us 17, 18 hours a day to do an election, we have got a lot of work to improve on to get elections done. So, I mean, I know it's more work for us, but I think we ought to recognize the hourly wage, and we ought to be able to time clerk it and pay that, rather than locking in on a fixed rate.
How did, I know that Mr. Massey did some work comparing where we're paying, and I think Ms. Lane, you did as well. Where do we fall? Are we on the low end of the scale or the high end of the scale, or where are we at?
Well,
with
we
that?
were on the low end as far as training because we were only paying $10 an hour. Other places we're paying and had been paying $12 and $15 an hour rather than just the flat $10 per day for training. So we're out of whack there. One of the things that you will see in the paper next week is we have an aging election inspector group, and several people have decided to retire as election inspectors. So right now we are in need of having additional people volunteer their time to work a long day. So the state mandates the rules and what we have to follow. We can't shortcut it. It is what it is.
But where do we fall in terms of these rates here? Mr. Mansour mentioned, we went, was it 40 to 50% increase?
Yes, 175 to 250 and 150 to 225.
Well, that's not
So
correct.
But again, that was based on the hourly rate, and
The 175 is
that is what threw it all out. But that's why I provided
When they
you with
screwed
the
up last year.
documentation.
So it was 120.
But Madam
So-
Clerk,
We need to have one meeting here, guys.
I have
I'm
to
sorry.
make a
That's right.
comment.
Yes.
For 125.
When we had the MTA county meeting here, okay, the question came up, and I have to disagree with you. We were not on the bottom. We
No.
were near the top, okay? Matter of fact, we were at the top
Of the pay scale
of
for
the pay
election
scale.
workers?
Yes. I want to make that clear. We're not at the bottom. Okay, now some municipalities, what they do, they come up with something similar to what you said, Supervisor. They have a flat rate that they pay, and if they have to work additional hours, they may say, okay, $10 for the additional
addition,
hour.
okay.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I was just kibitzing with Trustee Mansour. The 175 was the raise that we gave them over last year. So last year, Superintendent, do you remember what we paid them the last year?
Yeah, and look at that, thing I gave you, in the actions that you took in January, the chairpersons were at 175, and the election inspectors were at 150.
Right.
Okay, so we went to 175 to 200. So it's more than a 50% raise.
No, it's not.
And now we're talking about moving those up again.
Yeah, you're
So
going.
initially in January, before there was any
Am I
board
right?
actions taken, if you think about it, the election inspectors were at 150.
Yep.
The
Right.
request before you now is to take it to 2.25, and the co-chairs and chairs were at 175, and now that's being asked to go to 250. So Trustee Mansour was correct.
Yeah, well, it's more, because the 150, the 175 and the 200, so this will be their second raise. So, yeah, Unfortunately,
It was, you know,
I
it came,
tend-
Let Mr. Thomas finish his
sorry.
comment.
I agree with trustee Mansour with $12.15. That's, I mean, if we're looking for consent,
Well, I'm lost. What are you proposing, Mr. Thomas?
well, I agree with Mr. Mansour.
That it's,
The
Agree
12
with
and
them.
15, doing the dollar instead of the day. May I ask, through you to Clerk Lane, what do you do when a person comes in and works 2 hours?
we don't have people that work 2 hours, Mr.
Okay,
Thomas.
what would happen if somebody came in and said, because you said we have such an aging populace of volunteers, and all of a sudden the person said, well, I only can work a half a day this election cycle. Do you pay them? Do you break down the 225 into hourly and then go from there?
That would be what I would do, Mr. Thomas, but I haven't had anybody, while I've been here, work a half a day or work a part of a day or something like that, so that would seem to be fair, is to pay them if they can only work a
I'm
half
just
a day.
asking.
Mr. Atkins had his hand up.
I had a couple questions and comment. One is to trustee Mansour's point is it's hard to measure if there's areas you need to improve in or put some focus in. It's hard to measure something when you're doing flat rates, flat fees. So it's, if there is a problem or an issue where election people are working 17 or 20 or 40 hours, whatever it may be, and and they're doing an hourly pay, I think that gives us some data points to start looking if there's an issue. Another thing, and I may be off with my data on this one, but the new equipment is already been used or will be used in the next election?
It was just used for the first time at the May election for the one ballot question for the schools.
So it hasn't really been used enough to measure it. So what is the average length of a normal election?
Yeah, from 6 in the morning till what, 10
I
at
would-
night?
Something like that.
And with the new equipment, what do you expect to gain any efficiency out of that? Or is that just, it is what it is, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and
I think going from 6 to 9 or 10 o'clock is what is to be expected, because the equipment is to help the voter have an easier time to vote and be comfortable that their vote was counted. The paperwork at the end of the day is to meet state requirements and Board of Canvasser requirements that everything has to balance. Every bit of paperwork has to balance, and the Board of Canvassers, after everything is done here and gone through the Board of Review here, goes down to them, and then on Thursday, they start going through the hundreds of precincts to verify for the state that there are no mistakes. So it's the time afterwards that you're guessing at.
Right.
But using the figures that the board provided and what they wanted to pay is why I came back, because both Sue and Colleen felt they had to spend excessive amounts of time to make sure the payroll was accurate using the hourly rates. And the 223 was the average for the 40-some people that were working, based on the 12 and 15 hours that people were working.
Yeah. So, Ms. Lane, when does this have to be decided by? I mean, our next election is August, so we have some time if we want to discuss this
We should
further.
do it 45 days before.
So we could do it even
Right.
later this month if we had to. Mr. Guzak?
I just want to make sure, the state probably mandates that the polls have to be open at 6 in the morning till what, 10?
8 in the morning.
No, They have to be open at 7.
Okay.
And they have to be closed at 8.
8.
And it's the preparation time
Right.
from 6 to 7 to
Right.
get all the equipment up and running, guaranteeing that it's operating appropriately.
Right, and that's why
And then
they're
at
there.
8 o'clock, it all closes down, and that's when they have to do all of their
Yeah.
balancing out.
Right, so if it goes from 8 to 8, then you said? 8 in the morning till, no,
7
in the morning till 8 at
till
night.
8 is when the polls have to be opened by
right, and so you need
state
an
law.
hour before and at least an hour or two afterwards, right?
Well, it was 10:30 when I left here with
Right.
everybody.
But that's
with-
mandated, you can't
and-
cut those hours,
No, I
right?
can't cut those out, and
Right.
we used only 8 precincts at that point instead of the 17 we're going to be using in August.
Right.
But I guess, Mr. Clerk.
Yes, Mr. Massey?
Man, Mr. Chair, here's what I do know. Everything that I have ever dealt with, salary, whatever it is always based on an hourly rate. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that you're I'm using $225, okay? Now, if that's what we decide on, it has to be based on an hourly rate. Okay, say you say that the poll workers work, I'm just throwing this out there, 16 hours a day. So that 16 hours a day, you pay them $225, okay? Now, it's nothing for anybody to calculate. Each poll worker, based on their classification, get $225, okay? Move it up to a manager's position, whatever the title is, they get $225. But it's still based on an hourly rate. Now, we don't want anyone here spending 12 hours a day trying to calculate an hourly rate. So we're gonna give them $225, but it's still, you can break it down into an hourly rate, just in case when they come back and whatever could happen and someone says, okay, they had to work 20 hours, beyond the 16 hours, whatever it was, a total of 20 hours. Now you take the 4 hours and calculate the hourly rate, because you already know what the hourly rate is for $225. But you don't, you just pay every poll worker that's at that classification $225. At a manager level, you pay $250, if that's what we decide on.
Mr. Lemata?
So just food for thought for the board, and it kind of goes along with what Trustee Mansour said earlier. If you did decide that you just wanted to go to an hourly rate works just fine with payroll. Where the issue is that it's the either or, the and or this dollar amount or this, and then gathering the data, because it took quite a bit for the deputy clerk to gather the data on, well, who worked when, for how long, well, how many hours did you work? If everybody's being paid hourly and they're just putting an hourly payroll report together, that's incredibly manageable and will run through payroll just fine.
But, excuse me, Superintendent Lemata, Clerk Lane just said that everyone works a full day, nobody works a half a day, and nobody works, everyone's there from start to finish. So,
Well, the benefit of going on an hourly rate is if we gain some efficiencies with the new computers, we may save a few dollars if we're getting out earlier. Yes.
Or consequently, if it has to run a little over, we've
covered.
managed that as well,
Right.
fairly.
Let's give it some thought, and maybe we can come to a consensus on Thursday as far as maybe we decide to go on an hourly rate and just make it hourly only instead of doing the either or making it more complicated than what maybe it needs to be.
Well, my reason for bringing it forward was to minimize the complications
Right.
for
We
in-house
understand.
staff.
Yeah, it wasn't
Yep, okay. Well, let's think about it and see if we can come to an agreement on Thursday with where we go with that.
As we were going through this, so the idea behind it being is it's kind of based on Oakland County's One Stop Ready, and they have their own team of coders who wrote their software and developed this One Stop Ready program. When I found this program and started watching some of the videos that they had recorded, and then we started having the conversation about moving that forward for us, we came up with our Development Ready portal, and we've been working on it. We developed the workflow chart so we can see everything that gets involved in it. And we were really going to incorporate our current plan review process into our website and have, you know, different links go to different areas. But as we worked through this, Director Beller was able to find that OnBase did have this plan review module available, and it's, you know, it is a electronic plan review. There is just a cheat sheet that kind of talks about from submission to final C of O that kind of shows you how the process goes. But we were able to, through Robbie, be able to find a town in in Ohio, Westerville, Ohio, who has incorporated this into their workflow. And we were able to set up a webinar and actually participate with the folks from Westerville. They've been using it since April and watched. It's exactly what we're trying to do with our Development Ready portal. It's just that it is really making the thing so much more efficient. And then the greatest thing about these modules is that it's being able to give the developers a individual identifier that they can log in and see where they're at on the plan. They can upload plans electronically. We can go in and do a markup, so whether it's planning, whether it's building, whether it's, you know, we've gotten some information back from the county, we have the ability to make those changes and immediately submit them out. So from an initial plan review, this is about being, the process is smooth and as easy as we can, thinking like an investor instead of like government bureaucrats. Part of the rub on us from when I got here was they said it was hard to do business with Grand Blanc Township. And some of that was deservedly so, some was not. Sometimes it's about us being pitted against an outside agency that also has to do plan review, whether that's county agencies or the MDEQ. And things would bog down, and we get blamed for that process, and then you've got an outside agency pitting against us. This just eliminates that. It helps us be as transparent as possible. An investor comes in and wants to talk to us, we can show them, look, here's our portal, here's how it works. You're going to be assigned a project number, and you've got a unique identifier. We control what they can access and what they can't. If there's something during that plan review process that initial submission and DPW is reviewing it and they see that there's something wrong, or our engineers are doing their review, they see something's wrong, they can mark it up, hit send the letter, it creates it and it shoots it to the point of contact from the developer, who then, instead of it taking a 2-week process to schedule another meeting and come back, we can send it to them and have really like real time, an hour later, have them fix what was missing on that plan review and submit it back again, right back to us. They can go log in and do it. They can upload a new document. And all the original stays, and all of those are always just layered. So we have record of everything. Plus, because it's through the OnBase system, it automatically picks that up and categorizes it and files it into appropriate files. So it's one of the biggest benefits of doing all this electronic document storage and making us kind of the cutting edge for our area. Genesee County currently has a couple departments who do utilize OnBase, but not this plan review process. I believe that once if the board approves it and we can move forward with this, that you're going to see the efficiencies from a developer standpoint. The folks in Westerville couldn't say enough how good it was from a developer standpoint to come in and utilize this system. It's just the transparency, the ease of use, the speed of being able to go through it. I think it goes hand in hand with, as we talk about our expansion of Tech Village, about the potential of creating a DDA, becoming investor friendly and launching ourselves from an economic development standpoint. This makes sense. The $180,000 that the board's already approved would have included a portion of this, because I'm asking for the $70,000 as it was bid, but that included the integration with CityWorks. Everything DPW does is run through CityWorks. And so that was already included in the $180,000, but it's included again in here. It won't be we're paying for it twice. It just will come off the initial $180,000 that we had projected. Integration with Microsoft is in here, and that was already part of the $180,000. So I'm not, even though I'm asking for $70,000, it's not a full $70,000. The other thing is that we transferred that money over from the Capital Projects Fund, 100% capitalized for general fund. Yet the way this plan review process is going to go is realistically 50% DPW is fair, 30% to the building department is fair, 20% to the general fund. So as we move this forward, it's about how it gets capitalized appropriately by department. One of the changes with the uniform chart of accounts also comes into play here, with your building department being required to either be set up as a special revenue fund, or it has to be set up much like an enterprise fund like we treat water and sewer. We're going to be able to track our expenses much more closely and allocate costs of software, licensing, that kind of thing directly to the building department like we should be doing. I know we don't fully capture all of the expenses, but we do the best we can, but this does help us start to guide us towards what we need to do from the special revenue fund or enterprise fund, whichever way we decide to go with the building department for 2019 and moving forward. I have both Ted Chapansky as the building official is here, Robbie's here, and Jeff Sears is here, as well as Jack Wheatley, who's been working with us on the development ready. Any of these gentlemen can answer some of the questions that you may have.
You know, I guess I see this, Mr. Limita, as a huge upgrade in communication with developers or potential developers, and I think it's something that once we start using, the word will spread that you should see, you know, what this township's doing, because I think, you know, I see some of the communication that, you know, hey, this developer or this business wants to know where this is at. Well, hey, you know, it's with the county or it's with the state organization, state government body, and it eliminates the need for having to email, you know, 4 different people to find out where things are at. They can log in and see exactly where things are at, and if the county is waiting for the developer to take some action, it's right there showing them what they need to do. They don't need to call 3 different people to find out. You know, it's going from just having a fax machine to having email and text messaging. And we know how that sped up all of our lives and made things much more efficient. And I think with regard to development, I think we're eliminating a lot of hurdles and just making such a smooth process that I don't see, I mean, with today's technology, that this isn't cutting edge, actually. This is something that municipalities, if we were business, we would already be doing this.
I can give you guys a great example. I needed to go back and look at some prior projects that were approved in 2008 to work through an issue. And so I want to find out what the site plan review committee had done with that project to move it forward. So I look for a set of plans and planning. They have 3 sets of them. They all have different markups on them. So I read through each set of plans until I find the one from site plan review that says you must accomplish these 3 things for final approval. We didn't have a form attached to it. We didn't have anything. You had to make sure that we had the correct set of plans, because you could have looked through a set of plans, but that markup wasn't on there. And that's just a reality of how we used to do business. And not that long ago, 10 years ago, that was acceptable, and we continued through some of those processes. Getting a planning person in here was key. But really, you know, doing our document storage is going to be key. But this is like the next step when I look at it. Now, I didn't anticipate that we were heading in this direction when we started to explore OnBase a year or so ago. I certainly didn't expect this plan review process, because I didn't know anything about it until we got into the whole what's Oakland County doing and how can we be more investor friendly, started watching their videos, and then, you know, with Director Beller uncovering that we actually had a module. We didn't have to invent our own software, that there was a module. Not only was there a module, but it was developed by the OnBase people who were in the process of incorporating into our workflow. So it just seemed to work at the right place at the right time. Also, and I'm not really asking you for additional money, not to transfer funds from our capital projects at this time to accomplish this. We still have to break it down from a capitalization standpoint of the DPW's buy-in into this entire process, the building department's allocation, and then the general fund's allocation. So I have the initial $180,000, which we've spent 70 to date. So I still have the funds available for this. Yeah, we'll have to work something into it as we move forward, but we have the money to move this forward within the initial $180,000 that's already been approved by the board in the capital projects plan for 2017 or 2018. I'm sorry.
Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I have a question for the superintendent. Approximately how long does it take for the software to become effective?
So what we think is about 6 weeks, and what we're trying to do is we want to really have this thing roll out into September because a lot of things are happening. We're working on the website redesign, and we're going to put that development-ready portal in place on our website redesign. So we've been working with website developers. We're working with OnBase, and then these guys actually will send a team in here to work through our specific workflow and processes so that there is some customization. We're not just buying a module that's a plug and play, we put it in and now we have to change our workflows to fit with this module that was delivered. They actually come in and rewrite it to change the software to meet our specific workflows and our needs so that it actually matches up with what we need to do with the county and things like that. In the meantime, they do have a web-based module that the county, if they're not on board with us on using this plan review, they can actually still match up with us. We can send them plans, they can look at these things through a web portal. So while we're encouraging them to see how much easier it is once we roll this out, it doesn't mean that we're going to be sitting here doing modules and then like, oh, they don't have the capability, let's print out some paper plans and run them down to the county. We will be able to deliver them electronically, and they will be able to go in there and retrieve them electronically. So it does have some functionality there. But about 6 weeks from the time we start getting them in, and they'll work with us, but we're really shooting for a September rollout with the idea that it's a little bit slower for us from a project's perspective. And then we can take our time with working through the system. There's certainly some training that's going to be required from clerical staff and department heads, but it's going to be some learnings. We'll stay in touch with these Westerville, Ohio folks and keep picking up on their learnings. They were really great. I mean, they logged in. We got to do a webinar. They showed us to walk us through their system. The OnBase folks couldn't be better, and then to have them in-house here and actually customizing the software for our unique workflows, I think will be a huge help.
Mr. Lehman, would it be accurate, I'm thinking of an analogy, that if take one of the manufacturers, whether car manufacturers or suppliers or what have you, that a company places an order and it's almost as if right now that order goes through only on paper, that everything, all the transactions and drawings and what have you are all done on paper and has to be handed off to somebody physically. We're taking that process and digitizing it so that somebody could be a developer from Florida or California and be able to complete this process, or have their engineer or what have you anywhere in the world working on this project and being able to interact with the township and not having to hand off a physical piece of paper or make personal phone calls to find out where they're at or submit things. Is that?
Yeah, from an investor standpoint, they could have their engineer, that's gonna slow it down because our engineer's working in California for the next 3 weeks, where that's not gonna happen. He can log into our system, go through the portal, enter the project ID, and do whatever he needs to do and submit it, which I think is just amazing technology. It just takes us, leaps and bounds ahead of everything. The other thing is when people submit, because we're going to have that OnBase document storage, and we're still in the process right now of loading all of our different forms in and all of our documents, it's got that document recognition. So when you submit something to us, it automatically pulls it in and says, I know this document, where's the key numbers that I need, whether it's a PID or a project number or whatever, and it takes it and it saves it to the appropriate place online, into the folder that we need to use it in, so that we've got everybody, whether it's planning, building, DPW, they can all access the same information. They can see what other people are doing. So at any point in this process, if you have a developer saying, I don't know why this has taken so long, any single person with the license to go into there gets to go in and look at it and say, it seems like there's something with DPW. Let's go down there and find out what's going on, or let me find out for you and I'll get back to you. Because we can all see the act. It's not like, well, I don't know, my department approved it, and as far as I know, you're good to go. Or we're not sure. It went to the county 3 weeks ago, and as far as we know, everything's good. It gives us, it makes us more accountable, number one, because everybody can see it, everybody's accountable, anybody involved with that project can see what every other department did, and we get to hold each other accountable instead of passing the buck. Well, I don't know, I approved it in my department, and, you know, that's I'm hands off after that. We're all gonna be responsible for that project all the way through. If you're the one who they contact, then you've gotta be the one, and Director Beller and I had a great conversation earlier today about how do we see this through? Who's going to be our head guy? Who's going to be our coordinator making sure this pushes through? Got to have somebody who has IT knowledge, who has a GIS knowledge, who understands DPW projects. Right now, that person is probably Director Beller, but we'll work through that as we move through. I just think that in the long run, does it save time? Absolutely. I mean, it's about the speed of us being able to move projects through. And that was one of the things that Oakland County really touted. And if you look at them, that University of Michigan study just came out. What's the #1 county in Michigan for driving economic development? Oakland County. I don't want to tell you where Genesee County is.
Well, we're the gateway to Oakland County.
But we can, I love it, the fact that we can be known as this Grand Blanc Township, so that people start talking about, when you do business with Grand Blanc Township, you can't believe how that system works. We'll be driving this for Genesee County for a long time to come.
Mr. Mansour?
I have a couple questions. So this is basically a workflow software. How long has Westerville been using it?
Since April.
Have they been able to quantify some benefit from it in terms of number of projects processed, or the length of time of projects, or, you know, fewer touches? Or, I mean, have they been able, I mean, everything sounds great, it always sounds great. But have they been able to say, okay, we've been able to be this much more effective, this much more efficient, have they been able to quantify any of that?
Not at this time, but what they have been able to show us is they can pull up and show us a list of who touched it, when it was plans approved, when they were moved, when it went back out. That was, in itself, they can tell us that these are processes that could take up to 2 weeks that now happened in 2 hours.
Okay. So that sounds like something.
Right.
And is it, but the key to this, and I mean, all of us have done program management, is if you have this great whiz-bang thing, and no one else who has to touch it along the way can interact with it, then it really is not much use. So, I mean, you don't get the benefit of it. And I think you've outlined that other people, the county and other municipalities or other departments, don't necessarily have to have this software, but can still.
Correct. They have a web-based solution for people to be able to go in and still utilize with functionality, not the full functionality, obviously, that we prefer they had. We'd love them all to be having this exact same software that we had, but there is a web-based solution that they can go through and still receive and submit data to us.
And so there's a $70,000 plus or minus whatever the piece that you mentioned is. Is there an ongoing cost?
So the licensing, just the annual licensing for the different modules. And so out of that $70,000, for example, like I said, probably we already had we're really asking for $50,000 because at least $20,000 was already accounted for. Out of that $70,000, we also had $19,200. That's 120 hours of prepaid development and support hours for the configuration of our own unique software twist. But then the ongoing costs, you start to look at, if you look down that sheet from OnBase, the order summary that looked like this, you'll see the maintenance cost, which would be your annual maintenance cost, $800 for the Microsoft Outlook for the year, $1,200 for the CityWorks integration. So there will be some ongoing, like every piece of software, we have to do those software maintenance licenses on an annual basis.
So about $2,000.
For those, there's some other ones in there, $1,200 for the integration toolkit, $1,400 for the plan review named user client, $1,200 for the local government plan review concurrent client, $7,500 a year, I think, for the, $1,500 a year for the OnBase plan review. But we're not talking like, $200,000 here. We're talking, without grabbing my calculator and adding them all up. And Robbie, unless you know that off the top of your head.
I thought it was on that last sheet. I don't know if it was like 8,500 or.
Annual maintenance, $8,475.
Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, this sounds like an unbelievable item, but this company's only had it since April, right?
No, the company's actually had it. They chose Westerville, Ohio to do, we asked if we could, if they could have
do
one of their
webinar,
clients
right,
to do a
right.
webinar with us.
Right.
They chose Westerville, Ohio for the reasons that they thought Westerville, number one, was the most like us as far as
Right.
where we are in the process. They've had on base since 2015.
Okay,
They
good.
added the plan review in April of 2018. They went live in April of 2018, so they really have been working on it since the beginning of the year.
Oh, okay, because I just thought that that would be a good one for the webinar, but if there was another one out there that, like, Mr. Mansur was saying, they could give us some data, someone else could have been on it for, let's say, 6 months to 9 months, they could give some information back to say, okay, this is approximately how much we've saved, and, you know, so maybe we could figure that out, and then the other thing is, Oakland County's not on this then, right?
No, they have their own proprietary.
So they've got one similar that they built, right?
Well, and that's kind of when we started to model our whole developer-ready portal, was after Oakland Counties. But we don't have an Elbrooks Patterson and the kind of funding that they had for Oakland County
We're
and
working
Genesee
on it.
County that could develop our own software and recreate this program. Plus,
Right.
do you really need to recreate the wheel? We were like, we can take the best of what they've got and use it within our own systems, and that was until we found this, and then thought, man, we can fully automate this thing. It's leaps and bounds ahead of what we were going to do with our development ready portal.
Right, and Oakland wouldn't sell us their package, right?
We don't want to do that.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Well, and I think, part of the advantage going with this is that, I work with businesses that buy something that only a handful of people use versus something that's pretty widely used, and it's much easier to get support and what have you if you're using something that's more widely used than just one other location than you. Mr. Thomas?
Superintendent, when we first went down this road with the modules, you absolutely promised us that you would be coming back to us for increases in more modules. Now, this jumps out of the sequence. So now, will this take the place of some of the modules down the road that you warned us about that we would be purchasing?
It doesn't take the place of it. It's just a different rollout. We said when we initially started with asking for the board's approval to move with the on-base document storage, this wasn't even on our radar screen, quite frankly. It's just that.
So we're still going to see the other modules coming
Potentially
to us.
some other things will come up on that on-base platform. Right now, what we want to do is get our hands around this rollout with the on-base platform, get all of our old documents scanned in, have the new documents all being digitally delivered, and then get our hands around the plan review so that we figure that if we rolled it out, all these things in September, that kind of gives us the opportunity to work through some slower projects till after the first of the year when it starts to really heat up again. And then by then we should have not only been able to figure out how to teach developers the smartest way to use the system. And these guys from Westerville, Ohio, they shared with us, it's like 48 pages, so I didn't include it with you guys, but their tutorial that they put online, and they said, they even have a warning for developers, like don't print this out because it changes as we work through the system. But they've developed like this great tutorial with screenshots of, hey, you're having a problem with submission, then go here. And just having that kind of documentation from them will go a long way towards our rollout, because we know, or we should anticipate some of the bumps in the road that they had during their rollout.
Well, and also, if I could respond to Mr. Thomas' question, I think, one of the things that I'd like to applaud Mr. Leamet on attacking is that one of the things that we've been after is what do we do to remove the hurdles for development, and what do we do to get development here? I mean, we have an economy that's thriving. We've got a technology village that the doors are open and we're looking for investors. We have a general public, residents that are eager to see things come here. So what are the steps we need to do to clear the way? One of them is the DDA that we're going to talk about, but another one is once we get people looking at us, What are they hearing about us, and how do we handle development? And I think this is one way that, I mean, I don't know of any other way that we can try and clear as many hurdles as we are with the two projects we're taking on right now, which Mr. Lehman mentioned that Oakland County's had success with doing this, and rather than us developing our own software, I think this is the logical step. But I think it answers. I think the answer is we're doing this because it fits in right now. We with the website development, with the DDA, with the Tech Village, it just makes sense to focus in on this area right now rather than document, maybe focusing on scanning in a bunch of old records that we want to have a historical perspective on. We're going after new business, and that's where I think we need to have the approach. So any other questions or comments? And we'll be voting on this on Friday.
Thursday.
Or Thursday, I'm sorry. I don't want you to have to come back Friday.
Before you move on, Supervisor Bennett, Jeff, is there anything I missed from your perspective, or Jack, anything that I didn't touch on, or Bobby or Ted, is there?
I have a question for Mr. Wheatley. He gets around to a lot of different communities. Is this something you've seen active in any other communities, or have you worked in Oakland County with what they have, and what have you heard about theirs, if you're familiar with it?
A little bit in Oakland County, but mostly just for resources. But where we've done some of this is with the DQ. We submit for a wetland or floodplain permit. They'll tell you, you can check in at real time, anytime, and find out where you're at in the process. And the thing, one of the things that this would help us a lot with is when we review a set of plans, and then we send them back in. It has to go through a number of steps to get back to the developer and all, and it takes time. And then we don't really know if our questions or concerns were addressed, because we sometimes those revised plans don't get back to us. And so if we had something like this, we just get online, and the latest set would already be posted there. Or if not, we'd know if they were back in the whose court they were in, I guess. It would be super helpful. And then the other thing is when the final plans get approved and they're out there building the project, sometimes the township will have us do inspection on certain parts of it. And we never know if we've got the right set of plans. So the neat thing about this is when it's all said and done, the final construction set approved, permitted, construction set of plans will be posted on the website, and we can just go in there and get them. We don't have to we don't know if we should ask the township or the developer's engineer. We don't even know if we have to be honest with you, sometimes we don't know if we've got the final set of plans. So there's a lot of great things about this that I really like that can help the township a lot. And your town, this township is one of the most, I guess, just prolific in terms of site plan reviews and stuff. So I think that this will be a neat, could be a really valuable, system for not only the staff here, but the developers and, your construction staff, DPW construction staff, and it'll affect even the county. The county has to go through their approvals. They can see where it's at too, so I think it'll help,
Okay.
help with a lot of systems.
Thank you very much. Mr. No? Okay. Thought you had your hand up. Good. Mr. Thomas?
I just have a procedural question. Is there a way that we can move this to the consent agenda?
We could if somebody wanted to, but
I mean, that way we can, I think we're all in agreement that we want this.
well, is there consensus amongst our,
If that's the case, I think I'd prefer that you guys didn't, just in case questions crop up. If you guys had the opportunity to hear what we had to say, you look through it, and if there's a question that crops up, if not, then it won't take you very long to make the motion on Thursday.
okay. All right, unless there's further discussion, we'll move on to the next item, and that is the board will consider a resolution to approve the request from the Greater Flint Hockey Association to be recognized as a nonprofit organization operating in the community for the purpose of obtaining a charitable gaming license. Questions on that? The application was in the packet, and apparently the state's requiring them to get approval from us before they hold this particular fundraiser. Mr. Hansel?
So two questions on this one. I mean, I think I've heard of the Greater Flint Hockey Association, but is it a, I mean, they're credentialed, I suppose?
We looked over the application, Mr. Laddie.
Yeah, they included their bylaws, and their articles of incorporation. And you have that in your materials. So they're a qualifying charitable organization. The one thing that I was thinking of as I looked at this is I thought, well, I'm assuming that there's gonna be an event or a series of events that are gonna happen in Grand Blanc Township, and that's why we're asked to, give our consent to this. And I didn't notice anything in the packet, but I've seen these in other locations, and they are required to do this. I think we've had them here at Grand Blanc Township, where if they're going to plan an event in your municipality, they need to have your consent to do it. Looks pretty straightforward compared to what we've seen in the past.
Supervisor Bennett, there was
Yes.
one follow-up question to this. So I didn't see in there that this was for single use, multiple use, for a particular time frame. Is there something in there that I might have missed, or do we want to consider, you know, this seems like if you would approve it, then it's kind of like an ongoing thing, but maybe we don't necessarily want that to be a evergreen kind of situation.
And looking through the application, I don't see
Yeah, I don't think you'll
an end
find
date on
one.
it either.
The only thing that was shown in the license application was that it's an application and a fee to hold a raffle, is all it says, is to hold a raffle.
That's on the application?
Yep.
So can we, in our, I guess, a resolution, we can put something on that, right?
Limit on it. Yeah, put a limit on it.
Like how many, like one raffle in
Okay,
the
I see
next
it.
6 months or something like that?
Yeah, I see that on here. License application is for a raffle.
Yeah, well, the thing is, that's interesting, because
There's no location.
the resolution itself just talks about us recognizing them as a charity, a nonprofit organization operating in the community. And it's not saying, the resolution itself doesn't have
Right.
a specification for an event or a kind of event. I suppose we could, I mean, it's possible that we could amend that resolution to identify a singular event or a kind of event, because again, they did later on identify it as a raffle. The other thing we could do, and I'm not trying to make work for our administrative employees, but maybe we could find out what they have in mind and when.
And then where, because
Try
it
to pin it
doesn't
down.
show where either, does it?
No.
Not on the resolution.
Right, and it seems like we should have that, you know, so that way we know it's this date, this time, this place. Because if it draws a lot of activity, the police needs to know about it, because all of a sudden, if you get a ton of people going to that raffle, I don't know if it's just a raffle, you're selling tickets through the whole town, or if it's a location.
So we don't get one of these for everybody that's holding a raffle in Grand Blanc Township. I mean, we'd be inundated with these if we had one for every raffle.
I think when you have an organized nonprofit organization that's going to operate something like this, I think you will see it.
Really?
And their address is from the applicant's home on Kirky Drive, so I mean, it's listed as, it's a Grand Blanc Township address.
Nominally.
So it's the local governing authority that the governing body has to do the resolution, and so if the organization has a organization address outside of Grand Blanc Township, then we're not gonna be the local governing authority who would approve it. But I can call Jeff and ask him for more details on it. And by me, I mean you, Jeff, calling him, but because you talk to him all the time. But we can certainly find out what the intentions are as far as the raffle goes.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lehman, for checking into that. Item G, the board will consider a motion to approve the Genesee County Road Commission cost estimate for a 2-inch asphalt overlay project on Cook Road between Holly Road and McCandless Road for $156,657, and authorize Township Supervisor to execute all related documents. This project is at no cost to the township and made possible from additional state road funding allocation to the Genesee County Road Commission.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Massey?
if I'm looking and reading correctly, it's not guaranteed that I am. That looks like project on Cook Road between Holly Road and McCandless Road is incorrect.
It is incorrect.
They can't work it that way.
It's incorrect. It was Saginaw Street in the original proposal.
I think you,
Okay, so it's between Saginaw Street.
I think you want to say it's on Holly Road between Cook Road and McCandless.
No,
It's
it's
Cook
on
Road
Cook
between
Road
Holly
between
and Saginaw.
Saginaw.
Oh, well, I knew something was wrong. I was making it read correctly.
It was correct in the body of Jeff Transmittal, but incorrect in
Jeff.
his
I
motion.
don't, I remember Pollock Grove.
With that, Mr. Lehman, I know Mr. Mansour had asked at one of our prior meetings as far as, and maybe he was going to ask it again.
That was my next question. So.
Was that,
Yeah.
we do have, and for the public's information, there are Paiser ratings
Take one
for,
and pass this down.
for every street and road in the county, and that includes all of Grand Blanc Township. And so there is a rating system for those roads, and everybody believes their road is the worst, and I agree with them. But anyways, the bottom line is that we have to prioritize which ones we do work on, and also, I know I've received a number of phone calls about our DPW project of purchasing the Playland property, and why didn't we use that money for the roads? And I'd just like to take the opportunity to say that that money cannot be used for roads, that Department of Public Works money is for water and sewer projects, and that's what that property right now, the intention is for. And if it's ever used for anything else, we would pay back that DPW fund. But we cannot use those roads, that money that was used for that property on anybody's road. In fact, I believe it's a criminal offense to use that money for other purposes. So, Mr. Limata, would you like to?
So one of the things I handed down, if you guys look at that, that was approved the meeting of March 28th, 2017. The board approved our 3-year road plan. And this was where we work with the county road commission and talk about what kind of allocations they have from us. This is their Act 51 money, the money that they're spending for us, or in Grand Blanc Township. And you're right, we have Paiser ratings, and that's, I think everybody on the board's gotten one, except probably Trustee Adkins has not seen it, but we can certainly resend that out as far as where Grand Blanc Township is on Paiser ratings, and that entire package from the Road Commission shows you how we stack up against other townships as well. But this is the 3-year road plan that was approved. You won't find Cook Road on here, although you will see down on 2019 projects, McCandless Road between Saginaw Street and Holly. When the Road Commission received the additional funding, $184,000 that they had for Grand Blanc Township, we met with them. We know what we had already scheduled for our road projects, and we look at what can we do with $184,000 that would have impact. Pollock Road, putting $184,000 on Pollock Road would have absolutely no return on your investment other than patching some potholes. That's a much bigger fix. There's no bang for your buck. We also looked at Wakefield, which is certainly, you can make the case that they could use some repair, but also not $184,000 wouldn't make the impact on that road. It needs considerable repair. So if we're looking at something that's going to take $1 million or $2 million to repair, that $184,000 isn't helping us unless the board wants to somehow free up an additional $1 million to go with it. So we look at what we can do. We can put a 2-inch layer about a mile for $200,000. So when Jeff and I went down to the Road Commission and had the conversation, McCandless is one that we talked about because it's a road that's in pretty rough repair, but I think the Paiser rating on that is a 3, 4, okay, so it's better at a 4. We also know that, we can do something with that, and it was projected for 2019. The road commission told us that they're very confident that their application to take McCandlish Road between Holly and Saginaw off the local road list and upgrade that road means that we would no longer, that money's gonna come from the road commission to put onto McCandlish Road. So we didn't want to spend the money there, knowing that in August of this year, we're probably going to hear on the application to upgrade McCandlish from a local road.
Should have happened 10 years ago.
Right. But because they believe it, in fact, the one engineer who said, well, you don't do McCandlish because we think that the application's gonna upgrade that road in August, and then Fred Pavandi said, wait a minute, then it becomes our money, it becomes our issue, and we were okay with that. But with Cook Road, it was approximately a mile, and we believed we had enough at the 184,000. It came in at 156,000, and part of it is we only have to go to where the new road started. And so when Tranquility Estates went in there, some of that road had already been resurfaced up to Tranquility Estates, so that cut off a portion. And that's where the bids came in. I wasn't sure, the last time I brought this up with you guys, I wasn't sure, we didn't have the bids back in yet. Now we do, and we're looking at it, at $156,657. That leaves us some money left over to be able to do Howe Road, I think is what Director Sears and Jeff, you may want to comment on that. That would allow us to get Howe Road done, which is also on our 2018 projects list.
Good evening, Mr. Sears.
Good evening, how are you? So yeah, we do have a little bit of allocation funding left, our normal round that we get every year, which is about $62,000. Keep in mind, we are doing Reed Road this year. That was approved previously. We're resurfacing that with new limestone. They're finishing up some ditching over there, so that should be nice for those residents. We're gonna have a little bit left over in that funding, and then we'll have some left over in the supplemental funding. So Howe Road, you'll see, is on this year's projects list for allocation funding. We are going to try and get that done still. It hasn't come before the board yet because I wanted to see how this all shakes out with the road commission and where we end up, how much money we have left over to make sure that we can get this done. So Cook Road seemed to be the best option. We do have the schools there. They'll benefit greatly from a newly created road. I did contact the road commission if anybody's wondering on how it improves the life. Fred Pavani did tell me that he thought we would get 10 to 15 more years out of that road with this improvement. It'll take the Pacer reading from a 3 to a 9 immediately. We don't have very many 9s in the township. So it's a big improvement for us. It's good for the schools. It's good for those residents. That surface is pretty beat up. The road commission spends a lot of time there patching in the winter time and in the spring. So we figured this would be the best choice.
Supervisor Bennett?
Yes,
Couple
Mr. Mansur.
questions. So the way this reads is that we expected $120,000 from the county to take care of these 3 projects, right? I mean, that's,
So
and this $180,000 was in addition to that?
what this is, what I did with the road projects is whenever we first initially put this plan together, Dennis and I met with the road commission and they told us, you need to put more money into the allocation. You need to put more money into your local roads. So I developed this rather aggressive plan to spend more than our $62,000 a year on roads. This year I had in there to chip seal Embury, or last year to chip seal Embury and limestone grade tracks. The board approved the chip seal of Embury, but did not approve the limestone of grade tracks because the theory was we were not going to spend any more than what the road commission does on our local roads because they're not our roads. So in each year of these projects, I did throw in extra monies in there so that the board could consider that every year, knowing that our local road system is breaking down further every year. The road commission's not going to increase that allocation. It's good that we got this additional $180,000 in supplemental funds this year. I don't know that we're going to get it again next year. They have hinted that it might be a renewing thing, but I can't guarantee that.
So the question, so we as a board approved Embry, Gray Tracks, Howe, Reed, knowing that we were gonna get $62,000. We approved the plan,
The
right?
plan,
That's what it
yes.
says, right?
Yep.
And so now we get this 62 plus 180, I mean, whatever the number is. We
Correct.
hadn't accomplished all the ones above it, and it looks like the Cook Road is jumping line ahead of all these other ones. So we either made a mistake in approving these by not understanding the real needs, or we have something else going on. So I'm just trying to understand that.
So Cook Road was never included on these, on this plan because we couldn't do a project worthwhile with the allocation funding that we had.
Okay?
So we knew we needed to do some type of resurfacing project on Cook Road. We weren't going to achieve that with the $62,000 in allocation funding. So
But we could
didn't
essentially
include
catch ourselves up with everything we planned for 17, well, except for the Wakefield and Pollock, okay, I get that. For all the
Right.
smaller ones, we could get ourselves all caught up with this, with the 180,000. So I'm just wondering why we're not doing that.
we just thought Cook Road, being able to actually add 2 inches of pavement on there and improve that local road surface that otherwise is going to suffer even more. Some of these roads, like Gray Tracks, I mean, it can be graded out so that it's a nice road surface. Adding limestone to it would be great because we could improve the drainage and the road commission might not have to grade it as much. But
Yep, so Supervisor, I just wanted, so this is just the point that we didn't have somehow we didn't have the right menu in front of us because, you know, we have to have some transparency in this, and it would just seem that if we had extra money coming, we'd simply execute parts of the plan that we weren't able to execute before.
I understand.
So I'm just, and if we're not gonna execute the plan that we agree to, then I don't understand why we'd bring a plan forward. So I just wanna, you know, I wanna do everything that we can with the available money, no question about that. But I just wanna get the process straight here.
Scott?
Mr. Lemina?
So I just want to remind the board that when we brought this plan forward for the 3-year approval, we said we'd like to allocate more money during the budget process to go after some of these projects. And here's our 3-year road plan, and this is what we're proposing, because we have to create a 3-year road plan with the County Road Commission.
Makes sense.
Whether we can achieve it or not, it's kind of like, and they wanted us to commit to $400,000 a year in additional money, which we obviously could not do because we just don't have the funding for that. So we come through and we say, well, here's our proposal from a 3-year road plan that the road commission agrees with that we can do for minor dollars without coming up with what, I mean, you know, if we really wanted to put in, it could have been Cook Road for $184,000 or whatever, knowing that the board has told us over and over that Trustee Kent was adamant that we're not going to spend another nickel on roads because it's not our roads. Mm-hmm. So when we presented this plan, we're like, here you go, here's kind of where we can head, and Trustee Kent said, okay, we can, you know, this is a great plan for what we're gonna do, but we're not gonna spend a nickel more than what you did. So while we put our projects together, telling the road commission, these are projects that are important to the township over the next 3 years, there's no guarantee of funding or that we're gonna actually do this. It depends on funding availability. When you got something like the $184,000, that really, they gave us, but it's really like next year's money. It's just kind of trying to spur something so that everybody will be happy that, hey, look, the legislator fixed some roads. What was the most bang for our buck? Taking Cook Road from a 3 to a 9 and the years of life that we're going to get out of that, or it will continue to disintegrate, and instead of a 3, it'll be a 2, and then we won't be able to put any money on it, versus putting money on Gray Tracks, which is a dirt road. Can we make the drainage a little bit better on Gray Track? Sure we can. But is that the most bang for our buck with a one-time $184,000 allocation from the legislator? We didn't believe so. We believe that the most bang for the buck is taking a road that's a 3 and saving it before it turns into a 2 and it becomes a Pollock and we say, what are you going to do? We can't fix it. So that was the thought process behind it.
And a lot of these projects too, I mean, you look at the dollar amounts and they would fit the annual allocation. You know, the $69,000 for Embury, $54,000 for Gray Tracks. I mean, they're basically made to fit what our annual allocation was. Now when we get this windfall allocation. Hey, let's get the most bang for the buck, but I have heard that they're trying to push more money out from the surplus on the state level, so we'll see if that comes to fruition.
Be nice.
So,
Obviously, you can see we have a lot of work to do.
right. I think we were told that it'd take at least $500,000 just to keep our roads at the same level from year to year if we were to do something.
They did. They told us they wanted us to put $500,000 into the local roads every year.
And they'll guarantee that our Pacer rating overall doesn't get worse.
Yeah.
It won't get better, it'll,
Keep it at the same level.
right. And it's not, we didn't meet just one time on this either. This is a monthly thing where we're always talking about what can we do? Where did you get, was there money left over? Where did that bid come in on that project? Can we do something else? It's an ongoing conversation that occurs on a monthly basis. Although you'll still be asked to approve a 3-year projected road projects plan every 3 years because the road commission wants to have something in the books.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, hopefully the state reclassifies Cook Road. Or McCandless, I'm sorry, McCandless Road, as well as Pollock Road and a few others. Item H, the board will consider a motion to approve the request from Chief Wiles' recommendation to purchase 2 2018 Harley-Davidson motorcycles to replace the current leased motorcycles for the amount of $33,800. Authorize Township Superintendent to execute all related documents.
One question.
Chief, you want to talk to us about these? And Mr. Atkins, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'll let the chief go first.
Okay.
Sure.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. When we started our motorcycle program back in 2004, I don't know if we could adequately predict the benefit it'd have to the staff, the department, and the community. We've had this program going for 14 years now, and due to circumstances unforeseen by us and out of our control, we had to adjust how we carry on this motorcycle program. As you know, we are a professional, community-oriented police department. We focus on traffic safety and community policing principles. These bikes help us achieve those goals in traffic safety and our community policing principles, especially this time of year. When we see increased traffic, we see increased complaints from neighborhoods with traffic complaints, more people around the roads, summer vacation, more kids on the roads. So we get excess use out of these bikes. Plus you can't ride them in the winter. So primarily we use them for traffic enforcement, traffic safety in our subdivisions. These bikes can go places that vehicles can't. They're much more easily put into our subdivisions for enforcement and education opportunities. We use them for public relations activities. During the summer, we have Bikes on the Bricks. We have Back to the Bricks. We have the Ally Golf Challenge coming up. The bikes will be very much needed for those activities to have good traffic flow through those events and maintain the safety of the public. So back to 2004. We used to lease these bikes for $1,500. Wow. And we did that every year up through this past year. And then out of the blue, we were told, we turned in our bikes at the end of our lease, and we were told, we're not leasing bikes anymore to you. So we're stuck. We don't have any bikes for 2018. So we did a lot of calling, got on the phone, talked to a lot of people. The vendor we were using gave us the option of purchasing our old bikes for $13,300, I believe the price was $13,300, $13,400. Other vendors told us, well, we lease bikes, but it's $3,000 a year per bike. Then we got thinking, well, what's the cost of a new bike? We found a vendor that would sell us a new bike, a 2018. Our old bikes that we just turned in are 2014s for $16,600. We're told that through the reps at Harley-Davidson that these bikes maintain their value very well for resale, and that we can probably get anywhere from 5 to 7 years use out of the bikes before we'd even consider selling them and moving on to a new bike. So it'd be my recommendation to purchase 2 2018 Harley-Davidson Electric Glide motorcycles from Cement City, Town and Country Motorsports. They have them in stock. They are there. They want to get rid of them, and that's why they gave us the price of $16,600. Other vendors we reached out to, locally, Vehicle City was over $18,000. Motor City was over $17,000. So they really want to move these bikes, and that's why I come to you with this request today.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Atkins?
Just a couple of questions for the chief. I'm sure you've looked at it, but, you know, with the motorcycle crew that the state police has, is there a vendor that they use that, you know, you can use that same vendor and get a better price, or are they going through the same thing right now?
The state police has primarily, they don't ride many Harleys anymore. They
Okay.
moved to BMWs. So we've always been a Harley department. I talked about the staff a little bit. We have 2 highly trained officers right now. Officer John Strom, he's actually an instructor. When people want to become new motorcycle officers, they go see John, and John trains them to be a motorcycle, law enforcement motorcycle rider, certifies them. So we have very highly trained, capable people that they would prefer to stay on the Harleys. That's what they train on. That's what they've ridden for the last 14 years, and that's why we haven't really looked at the BMWs at all.
Okay. And then one other question is this, I'm assuming the price is not, there's an additional cost to retrofit them for the department, or is that?
There is. We currently own the equipment. From our lease bikes, we had to buy that equipment to put on our lease bikes. So we own all that equipment, Grambling Township does. We're going to take that equipment and put it on these new bikes. There is a cost to put it on there, though. That's not something locally that Steve Chilcutt can do in-house. We have to have a company called Procom, which is our local vendor for that, who outfitted our previous bikes. And I believe the cost was $1,800 to outfit those 2 bikes, total, not a piece.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Mansur?
So Chief, you mentioned this capability, motorcycle capability allows us to do things maybe vehicles can't do, but again, how many months a year would these be on the road?
Depending on the weather, of course. As soon as it gets warm enough and snow gets off the road, they're out. When it gets cold enough or snow on the road, they're off.
So they're out right now, right?
They would be, yes.
So half the year?
Yep.
Ish. So, you know, I was just going back through some old articles, and one of them that came to mind when I hear about motorcycles and police is the sad Chad Wolf situation. And boy, it makes it really hard for me to think that, you know, putting officers on these motorcycles as opposed to adding another police vehicle, which would be basically the cost of this that could run all year long, is the right thing to do. So I just, you know, as I kind of roll that over, I mean, it's certainly, you know, from safety and a full year usage thing, is really giving me something to really consider that.
Obviously, officer safety, whether they're motor officers, canine officers, patrol officers, whatever their classification is, officer safety is the utmost importance, at least with our department. We have policy that dictates specifically our motorcycles and our motorcycle operators, what they can do, what they can't do. The Trooper Wolf situation out on 75, our officers aren't allowed to be on the expressway except in an emergency situation. So that, just him being on 75, that wouldn't be our officer, because they will not go out there. They are on surface streets within the township, whether it's the subdivisions or, you know, Hill Road, that kind of stuff. But I certainly understand your
officers are at risk enough, and I just,
Yep.
you know, that whatever this additional capability or visibility, boy, it certainly.
Yep. The other thing that I would say in reference to officer safety, especially with motor officers, is the training that they receive. I touched on that earlier. It's not just, okay, Officer Smith, you're now a motor officer, go do it. These people are trained, whether it's through the Michigan State Police or Northwestern University to get their certification. Through the years, we've developed them even more. Like I said, Officer Strom now is an instructor. He's received that qualification, and they go through recertification training yearly to maintain their skills and to build on that and get better, just like any other function an officer would carry out.
And, you know, I probably have similar concerns in terms of safety, but, you know, I also know you guys are the professionals. And if you tell me that it helps us with, you know, community relations, with, I know right now, I can tell you this, that I receive numerous phone calls every week right now, and Chief probably has a phone full of text messages and emails from me, but the construction both on Fenton Road and the roundabout at Hill and Belsey are generating lots of traffic concerns. And I think actually a motorcycle, if we had them, would be quite useful in those areas right now.
Oh, there's no doubt, for sure.
So it is a safety concern, but I also, drive by police officers that are walking up on everything from trucks to cars, and I'm concerned for them in those cases too. So obviously they're a little bit more vulnerable as anybody on a bike, but
In the 14 years we've had motorcycles, we have not had one motorcycle accident or crash. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, Secretary of State Ruth Johnson came to the Grand Blanc Township Police Department to kick off her motorcycle safety awareness ride, which she did last year. This is the second year that she's asked to come here and participate because she knows of the program and the safety record and the outreach that our officers do to promote motorcycle safety.
how did we ride with her without any bikes?
We didn't. We went ahead in a cruiser.
Because typically we ride with her, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, didn't realize that. Okay. Any other questions or concerns for Chief? Okay. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is item I. The board will consider a motion to approve the lease and service agreement between the Genesee District Library, which is the tenant of our building, the Township of Grand Blanc, and the City of Grand Blanc, which we are the landlords collectively. And that lease would be through December 31st of 2027. So I don't know, Mr. Laddie?
Yes, sir. This is something that happens every 10 years, and you can see by the date of the agreement that we're a little late on it because it first went to the city for their review and approval, and then it was forwarded to us. And what happens is, this is really just a continuing agreement between the Genesee District Library and all of its libraries that are spread out throughout the county, and the relationship is the same with all of them. That is that the GDL provides the administration and the operation of the libraries, and the local communities provide the physical structure, and there is a level of maintenance that we're obligated for as well, including snow plowing and general upkeep. The agreement is something that has grown out of the statutes that relate to district libraries. This has been in place in Genesee County for at least, I've had experience with, I think, this is my second time in Grand Blanc. So every 10 years it's come around in all the different communities. The operation works well for the most part. We have an added level of partnership with by virtue of the fact that we own the library with the city. It is pretty seamless, and we meet our obligations in a very forthright and enthusiastic way. The other thing we've done, just as a side note, is we have an additional interest in improving the McFarland Library through donations, and we actually, a while back, we received a rather sizable donation from a trust. There was some discussion about where was that donation intended to go? Was it intended to go to the Genesee District Library for operations? Was it intended to go to the McFarland Library and its building? And we worked through that in a way that was satisfactory to the parties. We also, and Ms. Lane asked me about this just a while back, we've also tried to separate the McFarland Library and fundraising opportunities for just the library physical structure itself, and we have entered into a partnership with the city to do that. So again, it's fairly straightforward. It's uniform throughout the county. You'll see it every 10 years, and if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer.
Mr. Mansour?
So I don't have any question about the lease, which seems to be what I read pretty straightforward, but do we have a mechanism where we are keeping track of the in-kind costs or the plowing or that kind of maintenance that we perform for the library?
I'm going to, I remember us having some discussion at certainly the executive board level and possibly even the township board level. And I know that we've got some understanding with this city as far as plowing is concerned, for example. I don't know I don't know what extent our McFarland board, our McFarland Library Board, is involved in keeping track of, I guess, the improvements to the physical structure. But I think at least from the DPW standpoint, Mr. Sears might have some.
So just to clarify, so what I'm just trying to do is I'm just trying to get an accounting, because we're contributing money to the upkeep and to the renovations, and I want to keep kind of a scorecard in front of us of how much we're investing in our community.
Sure.
And this needs, I want to see that we have a tally for it.
Sure, and we can
Point.
certainly do that.
Mr. Sears?
Thank you. The city of Grand Blanc used to plow the library parking lot. Sometime before I came here, an agreement was made between the city and the township that we would take that over. And we've been plowing it ourselves at DPW for several years. This year, we actually hired a contractor to do that for us. Just because of the geographic location of it and the time it takes us to actually do that, the parking lot wasn't in real good shape, so there was always damage being done that we had to fix. So we put that all back on the contractor. And I can certainly provide those numbers very easily now, because we had those invoices.
Do we cut lawns? Do we trim
We don't,
trees?
the only thing we do there is snow removal. Occasionally, we will help the city with some landscaping projects. I think last summer, we pulled out some shrubs for them, but it's limited to minor things. We don't
Mr.
do-
Lemata, not, just because it looks like we have a lot of questions on this, are we tracking any expenditures for the library?
Yeah,
or-
it's all run through the library. I can pull that from finance anytime the board
Okay.
wishes to see.
So we do
what
okay,
exactly,
good.
but typically it's handled through our contributions, and then it was the DPW snow plowing where major expenses, and they would allocate because it had to be paid for out of the general fund, out of the DPW fund, so we got to go back for it so I could track that. Now we're using a contractor again. It helps us reduce the cost of repairing curbs and things that were getting charged to us. We'd rather they use a contractor and they control that snow removal.
Mr. Guzak?
Right, we didn't pick the contractor, they picked the contractor, is that correct?
No, I picked the
You picked it?
contractor.
Okay,
yeah.
because I know the bill came through, and that's why, I was involved in it, and I knew that
Yeah.
we started paying. And of course, I had to verify with the library that they actually were receiving the services, and we've got that
Right.
straightened out. So we did pick it, I wasn't sure.
We did. In my opinion, it was my responsibility because I was already in charge of the snow removal, so I just facilitated the whole thing.
Mr. Atkins?
Yeah, since I'm new and having the pleasure of sitting on both sides, city and now the township, any of these joint agreements, regardless what department it is, I'm going to be suspect of going forward and wanting to understand, and, it could be a timely, lengthy process, not something we'll solve right now, but I do want to understand, it's frustrating to know that there seems to be lots of handshake agreements and agreements on all these joint departments and community commissions and whatnot, and I think that as these come up, to go into them blindly, in this case, it sounds like there's some agreements from before. What if those agreements are not agreed to or upheld in a year from now?
Right.
Do we need to start taking these one at a time and getting rid of the old negotiations or what people perceived was the agreement, and really start locking in some joint contracts with some language to protect us?
Well, that's interesting, and we have engaged in that process on certainly in our fire department. But also, it's interesting in this case, and also the senior center, we find ourselves 50-50 joint owners of the McFarland building and the property. And other than the joint McFarland Library Commission, and I off the top of my head, I don't know what the makeup of that is for township to city folks. I think Ms. Lane might have an idea. But the McFarland Library Board is a recognized body, right? They make recommendations to the city and the township. They have engaged in a series of improvements, budgeting, lobbying on behalf of the library. So there is some formality to it with the McFarland Library Board. but it's a good idea to take a look at it. And from a legal perspective, this is interesting, as is the senior center, because we literally are on the deeds together. And how we administer that, other than the McFarland Library Board and then the senior center for the Parks and Rec, there are frameworks in place, but they are less formal than perhaps folks would like. And so I think your comment is a good one as far as looking at the McFarland Library Board, and also maybe just the operation of the senior center within the Parks and Rec. But I know we've got a lot of irons in the fire as far as our shared relationships go.
Just looking from, a quick snapshot, in my mind, we shouldn't be paying 100% of plowing. We shouldn't be paying 100% of anything. But
No, I know that I've had discussion with other board members, and I think it's a consensus that our board, I think Mr. Laddie stated it well, we've been working on the fire for a couple of years now, and we're hopefully coming to some resolution on that, but certainly these other areas, I know Mr. Thomas has had discussion with regard to Parks and Rec and looking at that agreement, so I think your suggestion is well taken, and I think we need to continue to be aggressively pursuing those. So,
Mr. Chair.
So,
Mr. Mansour?
yeah, but we'll continue forward with this lease renewal as a standalone versus any of
Part
the
of the
other
agreement.
things, right?
Well, this is interesting. Yeah, because I mean, and this is our primary endeavor, right? I mean, and this is the third party operative in this case is the GDL. And I don't think no one has an issue with the GDL and its function in relation to McFarland Library. We just want to make sure that the city and township are on equal footing as far as obligations go. Is that a fair statement?
yeah, that's,
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr.
I have a
Mansour?
concern, and it's along the lines that Trustee Mansour and Trustee Atkins have a concern, I think, about. What bothers me, Clerk Lane got involved with the Library Commission, a board, okay?
The GDL?
No, not the
Oh,
GDL.
McFarland.
The commission at the McFarland Library. She suggested what the budget should be.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No,
Yes,
they
she
Was
brought the budget
Mr.
forward.
Massey, was this something recent, or?
Yes. She sat right here at the board meeting and suggested that, do we have any money in the budget for the library? I remember that vividly,
For the
okay?
carpeting program?
For
Okay.
whatever it was for. And the clerk contacted commissioner. The guy, I forgot his name, the board
Mr.
chair
Foote.
commissioner came here and spoke.
Mr. Foote?
Mr. Foote said that yes, the clerk contacted him. So I think what Trustee Atkins is saying, that's not an agreement that we should be into. We should be more closely tied to the commissioner board like we are the fire commissioner. That's the way I think it should be. But this sort of running a loosely operation, because I think the supervisor mentioned that we need to be more closely to Mr. Foote. He needs to report to us more frequently than he has in the past.
Right. I think, we need to formalize some of those relationships where our board members that are appointed to them report to this board. And I understand what you're saying, Mr. Massey, and I'd ask, board members if you're going to have contact with our outside boards that you go through Mr. Lehman or myself. But I understand where Miss Lane was and that she had talked to Mr. Foote, and we'd like those discussions to flow through Mr. Lehman or myself. But that being said, I think that we're all in agreement that we want to make sure that these joint agreements that we're in, that we look at them and make sure that they're fair to our residents. So, that, Miss Lane, anything?
What happened was Mr. Foote contacted me, and I had
Sure.
him come here because it was during our budget time and made his proposal for what the McFarland Library wanted.
Okay. And the carpeting's been
And the
completed?
carpeting was what it was all
outstanding.
about.
Yep. So with that, I think, Mr. Atkins, your comments well taken, and I think we'll have that on the list. And I think we also want to ask the board members to come to one of our future board meetings, and let's have some discussion. Okay, we ready to move on to the next item? Item J, the board will consider a resolution to approve the addition of a street light to Glen Meadows subdivision light contract. Mr. Sears?
For quite some time now, I've been working with the Homeowners Association for Glen Meadows, which is off of Perry Road, right by East Middle School. They have a home that was built on a dead-end road that didn't have any existing streetlights, so they wanted to add a couple streetlights. The way the process works, the request comes to me, I make the request to consumers, and then I work with consumers for the specific placement of the streetlights. So I did all that. We worked on the
county has upgraded their radios and what have you with 911, and from my understanding, and Chief Wiles can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but the emergency sirens that we have for tornadoes and weather alerts, that sort of thing, are all operated on VHF, and basically that's going away with the upgrade that the state is making to fiber. They're switching over all their system to fiber, and so within the next month that system is going to be incompatible and needs to be upgraded. And for some reason the 911 just found out about this recently, and so I think you'll probably see something in the media, I would guess, in the next few days on this. But we also are awaiting a letter telling us exactly what that cost is going to be. To what we have to do is pay per siren unit a certain cost, and it looks like it's going to possibly be around $700. Could be a little bit more than that if they break out the price of some of the other equipment, but it's going to be based
$481.95.
Oh, they did send the email tonight? Okay. What is the price?
$481.95 per siren.
Wonder how they got it down, because earlier today it was like 700. Okay, I'm good.
Just out of curiosity, how many sirens do we have?
I believe, from what I heard from the county, probably 8 of them is what they were telling me, but. So they were going to, I don't know if that's in the letter as well, Mr. Limita, but they were going to break that out as well.
It's not. There's a total of 123 sirens in the county, is what they said. They don't have our individual breakout. I know that they would just, I had an email from Dave Stam in regards to sirens earlier at the end of last week, and I think there was a number in there. He had a breakdown of what they did when they tested them, where that inadvertent test went off and some weren't working. But I have to dig out and find that had the number of sirens in it. I just don't remember.
So just a matter of information, we actually own the sirens in our township. There's a couple of townships that the sirens they have are outdated, and so the cost is going to be a little bit more money because they're going to have to upgrade their sirens. Ours are all in pretty good shape from what I understand, so. Okay, Mr. Laddie?
Well, I sent you 2 written legal correspondences that at least they need your consideration, perhaps not tonight, but within, maybe Thursday. If you'd like to entertain it tonight, we could have an executive session. If you want to wait till Thursday, I'm not sure Thursday is going to be any shorter. That's all.
Thursday's going to be worse.
Okay. Is it the desire for our board to do this evening?
Sure.
Take 5.
Okay.
We need a motion, sir.
Yeah, Mr.
Chair,
Massey?
I'd like to bring up something. What are you hearing from the community, future agenda items? Tree limbs overhanging on Emory Road, it creates a driving hazard.
I think Mr. Sears has actually talked to the road commission about the trees on Embry, and they are aware of them and planning to do something about that. In fact, they may get rid of a few actually, but Mr. Sears, I have seen the emails with regard to that.
Okay. I also have one.
Mr. Atkins?
Yeah, another one from the community as well as myself. Embry Road and Grand Blanc Road.
You got that email too, or text message?
Well, a lot of people in my sub have brought it up to me to ask me to bring it up tonight. Now, I do, that some people were wondering if it was the diversion of traffic from Fenton Road. However, I'm not sure if that could be the excuse for two reasons. One is that's been kind of a pinch point there since I've moved in. And it is a little worse now, but it seems to be people heading back toward Fenton Road. So I don't think it's because of Fenton Road. I don't know what's changed there, but it's, Saturday it was probably a good 5 or 6 minutes.
Sure.
Just a turn or more, right there. So I don't know if we need, what you do in those cases. I know there's a couple lights that are close to each other up in the downtown part of the city. I don't know if a traffic study would be good there.
Mr. Sears can address some of this, because I know I've seen the emails, but one of the things, having lived there for a length of time and traveled that area daily, was the Thompson Road construction, believe it or not, last summer had a huge effect on the amount of traffic last summer, which you would have seen, because that was closed all summer.
Okay.
And then the Fenton Road, I believe, is having a big effect on it this year. But anyways, I know Mr. Sears had discussion on an ongoing basis with the road commission.
Yeah, we do know it's bad, and the road commission is finishing up a traffic study for that intersection right now. Previously, they've done the traffic studies and found that there's no remedy for it because they can't put a traffic signal that close to Door Highway with the expressway entrance right there. There was some excuse of that nature. They do realize that it's gotten more serious over the years. The stacking is really bad on Emery Road, especially around 4 or 5 o'clock when people are getting out of work.
It's moved up to 3 now.
Yeah, it's moved up to 3. So it's getting worse. They do know that. They should have a letter to us here within the next couple weeks. I'll be really interested to see what they're proposing. They did talk roundabouts whenever we first discussed it, I don't know, 6 months ago. I would be interested to see how they're going to figure that out. It could be something they're going to do in conjunction with Door Highway extension. Maybe you'll see 2 roundabouts there. I don't know. But they should have a letter to us here any time now that we'll definitely share with everybody.
The Door Highway extension, it shows a roundabout there.
Not at that intersection. Along the extension, there's going to be several, but not at that intersection.
Mr. Chair.
One other.
Yes.
I'd like to add one comment. I have noticed the majority of the traffic that comes onto Emery Road comes from Holly Road.
Sure.
Now, I don't know why it has increased from Holly Road, but most of it comes from Holly Road.
Because they're avoiding Fenton Road. They can't take Cook Road to Fenton anymore. They have to take Embry to get west over to the expressway.
okay.
To get on 23 Expressway, they have to take Grand Blanc Road now.
Okay.
So rather than going through downtown Grand Blanc, they're avoiding that by taking Cook to Embry to Grand Blanc Road.
Okay.
At least that's my thought pattern from being over in that area daily.
Sounds logical.
One real quick one.
Sure.
I don't know how it works, but when traffic backs up in one area like that, do we control the timing of light changes at another section? Do you ever look at that to help?
We don't.
I'm sure
The
that
road
creates a
commission-
whole other bunch of
It
problems.
does. The road commission has sole control over it.
Okay.
So I do occasionally get complaints from people about timing, and I'll send it over to the road commission, and they're very good about responding.
Okay.
In this case, I don't know that they've looked at anything. That's part of traffic studies, though. They'll look at the timing of the lights at Dorton, Grand Blanc Road there. That's not the issue. The issue is the proximity of the intersections to each other. So they just have to figure out what kind of traffic devices they can put in there to better flow that traffic through there.
Okay. Thanks.
And we've talked, I mean, it would be very dangerous to have a police officer even there directing traffic.
Yeah, that wouldn't be advisable, I wouldn't think.
We could use one of the new motorcycles.
We could have board members volunteer to take shifts.
What are you doing for the other 6 months?
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn to executive session?
I make a motion to adjourn, go to executive session.
Ms. Lane?
I need a support.
Oh, is there support?
Support.
Mr. Atkins. Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.